Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome to the pre-show. We are getting things ready to go. And we're live. All right. And we need to change the website. For those of you that are watching on the replay, if you don't want to sit through all of the pre-show, you can fast forward 10 minutes and you'll be at the start of the show. Or you can just hang out with me and we'll figure out what's happening in the chat room. If you are watching on YouTube, as I put into the YouTube comment, the YouTube description of the video, you can join us live at professormesser.com/live. Would be nice to be able to talk. I think we're good. Okay, website should be updated. Let's see if it is. Yes, it is. Join the live stream. So that works. We can get rid of that. We can get rid of this. Maybe we can start this up on the GTS Learning site. Maybe I could show some SY0501 practice labs later today. Let's launch the labs. And maybe we can get one going. Just have one ready. All right, SY0501. Let's do one on, how about a gnat? There's a gnat. Start gnat. And it's power on everything. All right, so I already did the podcast intro, so you missed that part before we were live, but that's okay. It's not like that was too exciting or anything. So that was good. Oh, you know what I need is study groups to show people the study groups. Those would be nice. Or the study, the course notes. We're on the study group. What am I saying? Let's go down to the SY0501 course notes. And let's get you the latest version of that. There they are. Let's do that in 2-page form so it looks nice. There we go. Nice. See, now we're about ready. Hello, chat room. Welcome. Join. Let's see if people are actually here. It'd be nice if I could see, yeah, people are here. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the chat, to the site, to the live stream, to all these things. We've got Security Plus is what we're doing today. Security Plus. Got a weak bit of a cough. I'm running out of spray. I need to order more spray on the Amazon. Get some of that here. I thought I ordered more. I must be mistaken. Welcome, chat room. I'm guessing you're there. I'm guessing I'm live. I'm guessing there's audio. Let's do a quick check of cameras. I don't know if I'm happy with camera 1. I've been adjusting things while you were gone. Not super happy. Not incredibly happy with. Can we make it higher? Can we? No. How about that? That's much better, isn't it? Sometimes it's better not to mess around with these things prior to going live. Just not happy with it. So stand by. I'm going to adjust cameras. It's okay. It's not going to hurt but a second. The problem with configuring a camera when you're not sitting here is you don't know what it's going to look like. And just slightly changing the camera location can be a dramatic difference. And I can't say I'm really happy with that either, but we're going to go with that. Should I bring it down? That's just too low. I took off the camera. So there's a camera back here. You can now watch me walk around and adjust it. And the problem is you make a tiny adjustment, and it's actually a huge change. That's better in frame anyway. We'll take that. What else we got going on? Camera-wise, we've got to put up something on the screen. Let's do that. Let's put up, let's check camera 1. So now the camera, that's a little better. That's a lot better, actually. Camera 2, camera 3 with me in it. Hi, how you doing? Camera 4 with me in it. Camera 1 with phone number. See, it all works. That's great. Okay, now we're ready to go. See, now we can do something. 4 minutes, 15 seconds. We'll get started. Thanks for joining, everybody. We're getting into that holiday week coming up, aren't we? Here in the United States, it's Independence Day, July the 4th. So that's next week. So there will be no study group next week. As you can see in the live study group calendar, professormesser.com/calendar, or the links at the top of the page, there's nothing going on next week. Actually, I'm getting a new streaming device next week. Tomorrow. I'm getting a new 1080p streaming box, and I'll probably be testing it at some point. And then maybe next week. Maybe next week while it's a holiday week, people are out, I'll just turn on the lights and we'll answer phone calls for an hour or something, just to see if it's working okay. Because if it's not working okay, we don't need to use it the following week for the live stream, for the actual study group. But it'll be a good test. I can get feedback from the chat room. You can tell me if it's okay, if it's not okay, if it's whatever. We'll see. That will arrive tomorrow, so I get to play around with that the rest of the week. Actually, the rest of the week, I've got to write pop quizzes for next week. I've got no study group to create. Normally, I'm creating a study group on Thursday or Friday. Don't have to create one of those, just have to do pop quizzes. Maybe I'll get that done today. After the study groups, it's all downhill for me. It's difficult to maintain any type of productivity because this is just a long sitting in front of the mic kind of thing. But if I can get, I usually will get the podcast created and posted by the end of the day. And then if I have time, it'd be great to have that done. Then on Thursday and Friday, I can concentrate on the other project I have going on right now that you're not going to see for another couple months. This is the problem with my projects, is they always will last an enormous amount of time. And then finally the project is done and you get to see it. But in the meantime, you don't see anything from me. You see our study groups and that's about it. There's always something going on. I'm not just sitting around, I promise. There's some cool things coming. I think they're cool. We're going to find out. They really are cool. Okay, let's check temperatures. Let's check. Audio seems okay. Nobody's complaining. Chat room's not real active today. Are you guys awake? Are you guys there? Where are you checking in from? Are you here and ready? I think I've got some pretty good Security Plus stuff for you today. Some of these, okay. Audio sounds fine. Except for the talking part, it sounds great. Lynchburg is checking in. So it's East Coasters. Some of us East Coasters are here. Alabama. Need to get back to Alabama. I haven't been there in a while. I've never been to South Dakota. Need to do that. California is here. Let's need to get back to California. I was just in California. When was it? A year ago? Went to the Disneyland. It was awesome. Texas, of course. I promise not to mess with you. Oceanside, California. I was in California less than a year ago because I went to see the sequoias. Got pictures around here somewhere. But I won't bring the pictures out, I promise. We won't do that. Let's make sure this is working. It is. Chat room is up. Everything seems to be ready to go. If I've forgotten something, then we're just going to go with it. How bad can it be, really? Well, it can be very bad. But we're going to pretend that everything is fine. So we'll get things ready. If you are on the website, the live event chat is the one I'll be checking into. So make sure that you're in the live event chat, not the general chat. Because I look over to the general chat. They're actually both on my screen. One's blue and one's yellow, for those of you watching. What happened to the bird feeder? I need to re-crimp the connector that's out at the bird feeder. It is not working very well, and I think that's my problem. So I've got to troubleshoot. I've got my cable tester, and I do plan on getting that up and running. Maybe you've now pushed me. Now I need to do something about that today. It's top of the hour. Let's get a study group going. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 2018 Professor Messer Security Plus Study Group from the world headquarters of Messer Studios here in Tallahassee, Florida. My name is James Messer. I will be your host for this first hour of questions and answers, and who knows what else we'll talk about during this entire event. This first hour, though, is usually Q&A. I'll tell you all about how to make sure that you can participate with our live Q&A. We've already been checking in with folks that are all over from Miami and Texas, California, South Dakota, and Alabama, and Virginia, and elsewhere in the chat room. You're also welcome to join us in the chat room at professormesser.com/live. So if you're watching this on YouTube live, then you'll notice there's no chat there. The chat's over on my website, professormesser.com/live, which has both the video and the chat on one page. You can pop it out, move it to another screen, and participate that way as well. If you're not watching live, then the chat's still there on the website. There's a general chat available on my website 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can always stop in there and see what's going on. I'm able to have these live study groups with you thanks to your support. Of course, all of my Security Plus videos, my Network Plus videos, all of the training videos I create are available to watch for free on my website. Every minute of every video, there's no registration, there's no paywalls, there's nothing preventing you from learning everything you need to know to pass one of these exams. Some of you like to get offline versions of these videos, and there are offline versions available for sale. You can find those at professormesser.com/getsecplus. You'll find that you've got high-def videos with closed captioning. There are audio MP3 versions there of the videos. And if you also buy this, you get my course notes for free as well. So thank you for your support for that. It helps us able to have events like this, which is kind of nice as well. Don't forget about what we do normally during the week. You can find me and send me direct messages or just see what's going on the Twitter feed at professormesser.com/Twitter. I highly recommend that you follow us on the YouTubes. Helps me quite a bit in making sure that YouTube is able to treat you nicely. You can find that at professormesser.com/YouTube. You can subscribe there, and you can even click the little alarm button if you'd like to be notified of new videos. And of course, don't pay full price for your vouchers. You want to go to professormesser.com/vouchers and get a voucher discount. That way you don't have to pay full price. Let's go to the next piece of information I have for you. We're going to talk about what we're doing today. I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to give me answers. I take an archive of all of these questions and answers and make them available on the site. There's not quite enough 501 messages quite yet, but we've got plenty that we can talk about on the website. There's 401 questions, there's Network Plus questions, there's A Plus, and as we do more of these, we will be creating a lot more 501 questions on the website. So keep track of that at professormesser.com/pop-quiz. For those of you in the chat room, if you're looking for the live stream, you can always find it at professormesser.com/live. That'll get you both the live stream and the chat. I also take this entire live stream and I make a podcast version of it. So you can get an audio version of everything that we're doing. Not everything that we're going to do has a visual component, so it does make an awfully good podcast. I break up the first hour and the second hour so you can choose what you'd like to listen to. You can find information on how to link to those or to listen live and on replays at professormesser.com/podcasts. Podcasts. Well, we know what we're talking about. There are actually 2 Security Plus exams you could be taking right now. The SY041 is the exam that's been around for about 3 years, just over. It was released in April of 2014. That exam is going away on the end of July 2018. So you've got, I think it's July 31st. So you've got effectively a month until the 401 exam disappears forever if you're planning to take the English-speaking version of that exam. The problem you're going to run into is that if you don't make that time frame, it all changes now and goes to the 501 exam. The 501 exam is available now. It was released in October of 2017. So it's been out a number of months now. So if you're someone who's just getting started with your Security Plus here in June of 2018, I highly recommend you start with the 501 materials. The 401, the 501 are quite different in content. The structure of them, though, is almost identical. The structure of the exams is a maximum of 90 questions. You might get fewer. There is a passing score of 750 in a range of 100 to 900. I know it's kind of weird how they do that, but that is the range. You'll get a choice of multiple choice questions and a choice of performance-based questions. We'll talk about what performance-based questions are in a moment. Now that there are 2 exams out, a number of you are going to be asking, well, which one do I take? Obviously, the 401 is only going to be available until July 31st. The 501 exam is going to be available for at least 3 years. So if you're trying to start right now, it seems obvious which one you should start to, especially when you consider that it usually, on average, takes about 3 to 6 months based on what I see of people coming to my site. So that's quite a bit of time. These are not easy exams. The 501 exam, by the way, is very different than the 401 exam. You'd think there wouldn't be much difference. It's only 401, 501. It's almost the same number, isn't it? But the content is quite different. There are 758 topics. If you count up every single topic in the CompTIA exam objectives, 466 of those are brand new to the 501 exam. That means 60%, more than half of the 501 exam is new from the 401, which brings up a good point. If you're planning to take the 401 exam, make sure you study from 401 materials. If you're going to take the 501 exam, make sure you study from 501 materials. Do not mix and match these materials. Make sure you have exactly the right materials for the version of the exam that you're going to take. So that's a pretty important thing to consider. Yes, it's quite a number of topics on the exam. The chat room's like, we didn't count them up before. Yeah, but I did, because that's what I do. There's a lot of topics. So those are things you have to know for the exam. Just make sure you study the right thing and you're going to do just fine, I promise. Today I'm going to ask you questions, primarily from the 501 exam, to participate live. And this is something, unfortunately, only available if you are watching live. You cannot run through our Socrative questions if you're watching this on the replay. It's a good reason to join us live anytime we do one of these study groups. So you can pop open a new tab in your browser and go to professormesser.com/QA. That will take you directly to the questions that I will be asking today. You go to this page, you just sit there, and I will control everything for you once you get to that page. There's also an app you can get for your mobile device. It's called the Socrative Student app. It may ask you for a room name, and that room name, well, it will ask you for a room name. The room name is Professor Messer. PROFESSORMESSER. So that's important that you spell that properly. You won't be in the correct room. Now, if you did manage to pop open a new window, go to professormesser.com/QA, and you want to see if you're in the right place, there should be a question waiting for you. In fact, it's a question from last month that I put in here just to see if you can get to the right place and that you're ready to take these questions. But maybe a number of you remember this from last month. The question is that you've been tasked with performing a pen test on a third-party network, and you've been given a folder labeled white box. Which of these would most likely be in the folder? Maybe it's jewelry. Is it jewelry? It's not jewelry. But there is a multiple choice available to you. Is it A, a USB drive with the pen testing software? Is it B, a list of servers and a network diagram? Is it C, a date and time schedule for the testing? Is it D, a non-disclosure agreement? Or is it A, the results from the last pen test? And as you can see, this is one where we have had this last month. A number of you probably remember. I see interactively as people are voting. I get to see your votes coming in, and 80% of you have chosen B, a list of servers and a network diagram, which indeed is the correct answer, if you recall, from last month. Whenever you're doing a pen test, you have these choices between a white box, a black box, and a gray box. And the white box is one where they're going to give you everything you need to know for the pen test. So this is one where they might give you a lot of documentation just so you'll get through the pen test and have everything you need. Sometimes it's a black box where they don't tell you anything. They just say, see what you can find. It's up to you to do the recon, figure out what's on that network. Sometimes it's a gray box where they give you just enough to get you going, but don't tell you about other parts of the network. It just depends on what you're going to do. So a number of you can at least see this. You're in the right place. You're in Socrative. Just stay on that page, and I'll control all of the Socrative questions for you, and you'll be able to answer as we go along. One of the things that's important to know on the Security Plus exam, the Network Plus exam, the A Plus exam is that the first set of questions that you get on the exam are not multiple choice questions. We usually think about these exam questions as being multiple choice, but the multiple choice part comes later on in the exam. The first handful of questions are going to be questions that are not multiple choice. CompTIA calls these performance-based questions. They are questions that might be fill in the blank. They might be putting things in a particular order. They might be dragging something and dropping it onto an image or a display. Maybe you're putting things into a particular order there. Or maybe they put you at a command prompt and they ask you to perform a particular function at a command prompt. So it's really wide open. They might give you anything to start with. So on our study groups, the first question I like to give you is a performance-based question. So here is your performance-based question of the month. Let's see if I was able to do this the way I was hoping to do this. So the question, this performance-based question, asks you to match the following data states to the type. Now, each state in this list is associated with two different data types. So let me run through these for those of you that are listening in. The states of data that we're looking for to match with these types is data in use, data at rest, and data in transit. Those are the three. So you should, of course, think about being able to find what all three of those are. So hopefully you know what data in use, data at rest, and data in transit happen to be. So those are the data states. Let's talk about the description of these data states. A would be user files on box.com. B would be an ISO file containing a system image. C is creating a hash of a password. D is an 802.1q trunk. E is an Ethernet frame. And F is calculating a spreadsheet formula. So those are the types of data that we're dealing with. We need to know what state goes with what type. And as I mentioned, each one of these states is associated with two of these types. So if you think it's that they're in the exact order that they are on the page, you could say 1A, 1B, 2C, 2D, and 3E, 3F. It's not, by the way. Don't think it is. Did I do that? Probably not. I hope I didn't. That would be a little too easy, wouldn't it? So you should be able to match these up. Try to figure out exactly the part that's matching up with these, and you should be able to piece these together. It's important to know what data in use, data at rest, and data in transit are. They are part of the SY0401 exam and the SY0501 exam. So regardless of which exam you're studying for, this is a question that will apply to you. See, there's a little bit of overlap. There's 40% overlap, right, between the 401 and the 501. It's only 60% of the content is brand new that you have to know. Now, a number of you are putting in the answers. It is a fill in the blank. You're filling these in now. We've got a number of folks that are putting these in there. And even if you don't know what the answer is, you should always take a guess. CompTIA said in their frequently asked questions on their website that some of their performance-based questions give partial credit. Some of their performance-based questions do not give partial credit. And you never know which one of these questions will be giving partial credit or not. So maybe this is one that might, it's a type of question that might give partial credit because I think we could get some of these right, some of these wrong. Other questions they might give you are you're at a command prompt and they say you need to do this particular function on the command prompt. And CompTIA has told us that they don't care what it takes you to finally get to the final part that they're looking for as long as you get there. If you do it in one step, you get full credit for that question. If it takes you 20 steps, you get full credit for that question. So I think that those types of questions are probably all or nothing. This might be one that could be, but we don't know. CompTIA does not Keep track of these things. So let's see how we did with this one. This is obviously a fill in the blank because there's no multiple choice. So what we'll do is go through each one of these on the screen. The first one is data in use. The two types of data in use that we had in these particular examples, the first one was C, creating the hash of a password. We're creating that hash in the memory of a system. There's a CPU that's creating the hash. That's clearly something that is in use. That is probably the best example of data in use that I can think of, where you're actually in memory, you're calculating information, and there it is. Another piece of data in use would be F, calculating a spreadsheet formula. So you can see there is some commonality there. This is a system that is doing some work in the memory, in the CPU. It's active in the RAM, and that is absolutely something that would be in use. The other data type, data at rest. Data at rest. So commonly we think of data at rest as data that is stored on a piece of storage medium. So data at rest in our example would be A, user files out on box.com, stored somewhere in the cloud. It is resting in the cloud. And B would be an ISO file containing a system image. See, it was almost AB in that example. An ISO file is on a flash drive, it's on a hard drive, it's on an SSD, it's on some type of storage media, and that media is containing a system image that is indeed at rest. So let's do the last one, which would be data in transit. Obviously, we've only got two left. So in this case, it would have to be D, an 802.1 Q trunk. And of course, I put the Q in the wrong way. The Q's a uppercase. So I spelled that wrong. And an Ethernet frame, which would be E, Ethernet frame. So to summarize for those listening in, is data in use would be C, creating the hash of a password, and F, calculating a spreadsheet formula. Data at rest would be A, user files on box.com, and B, an ISO file containing a system image. And C, or 3, would be data in transit, which would be D, an 802.1 Q trunk, and E, an Ethernet frame. So these questions can be a little bit involved, as you can see. There might be quite a lot going on with these questions. If you're someone like me who gets into the testing center, there's a lot of anxiety. You've now got to give your ID, and they're taking a picture, and you're in a room, and it's a different computer, and there's other people in the room, and we're starting the test. And the first 5 minutes of the test, the adrenaline is running, and you can barely understand what you're reading on the screen. I tend to try to take a lot of time. You know, the first part of the exam is like 15 minutes for you to read through and say yes to the candidate agreement. If you're someone like me who gets very uptight during these exams, you might want to take that 15 minutes. Maybe read through it. Maybe just do some deep breathing. Just relax so that when you start the exam, you'll feel better. But what I tend to do is skip over the exam, these performance-based questions on the exam, and I go right to the multiple choice. And I just go through all the multiple choice first. CompTIA is one of these exams that they allow you to jump back and forth to any question at any time. Not all IT certification exams are like this, but CompTIA does allow you to do that. So one of the things you do is by going through the multiple choice, it might jog your memory about things you're going to run into the performance-based questions, which is what helps me. So just make sure you keep an eye on the clock, make sure you control the time properly, and then come back to the performance-based questions at the end. So just that's a little tip. Maybe that works for you. Maybe you're not, maybe your style's a little different. Find the one that works for you and go with it on the exam. Let's start with a multiple choice then. Let's say we're finished our performance-based questions. We should go directly to some multiple choice questions. And here's the first one of the day. Sam needs to create a symmetric key to encrypt data that will be sent to Jack. What additional information will Sam need to complete a Diffie-Hellman key exchange? Oh, well, let's find out. Fortunately, if you don't know this off the top of your head, we do have multiple choice available to answer this one. So Sam needs to create a symmetric key to encrypt data that will be sent to Jack. What additional information will Sam need to complete a Diffie-Hellman key exchange? Will Sam need A, Jack's public key, B, a symmetric key sent from Jack that's encrypted with Sam's public key? Would it be C, a new public-private key pair that's shared for the duration of the transaction? Would it be D, Jack's private key? Or would it be E, a symmetric key sent from Jack that's signed with Jack's private key? One of these is what Sam will need to complete a Diffie-Hellman key exchange? If you think you know the answer, do not answer in the chat room. You want to go to professormesser.com/QA and answer the question there. This is a question that applies both to the 401 and the 501 exam. Diffie-Hellman key exchange is definitely part of that. All these questions about public and private, symmetric and asymmetric and all of those things, those do apply towards the 401 and the 501 exam. So you do absolutely need to have a very solid understanding of what these things are. I will say, if you're someone who is studying this section for your 401, I added a lot to the cryptography section on the 501. So there's some nice in fact, I'll show you the Diffie-Hellman key exchange in a moment. So I've got some graphics that kind of step you through the process that might help a little bit. So if you're working on the 401, you may want to jump over to some of the 501 videos and see the updated version of those. It might help you a little bit. Some of you are answering. I'm going to take a quick peek at how we're answering with this one. My goal whenever I ask these questions is to get half of you knowing the answer. I guess you can think that I want half of you not to know the answer, which is sort of true as well. Doesn't sound good when you say it that way, though. So I want there to be some question about this. These are not easy questions, especially when you get into encryption. So first, let's figure out what we need to do with this one. And I think it would be good to step through Diffie-Hellman and understand more about that. Let's see how we did with this question. And you can see that 43% of you answered A, Jack's public key. We've got really a three-way tie for second, though. It's about 16 or 17% of you said B, a symmetric key sent from Jack that's encrypted with Sam's public key. 17% said a new public-private key pair that's shared for the duration of the transaction. And 16% of you said a symmetric key sent from Jack that's signed with Jack's private key. Only 8% of you, single digits, said D, Jack's private key. So if we went with, it's not a majority, but it's the largest number of people voting here at 43%, said Jack's public key. Is that really what we need for Diffie-Hellman key exchange? What's interesting about Diffie-Hellman key exchange is that it's not a process of encryption. It's a process of finding a key that two people could use to encrypt with without actually sending that key across the network. It is a remarkable piece of technology. Let's step through what Diffie-Hellman does. Here's an example of this. Two different people. We've got Bob and we've got Alice in this particular example. Well, so let's see how we do with this. In this example, we're going to do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange so that these two people can get a similar symmetric key. So what we're doing, we're not trying to build out a separate public-private key pair. We just need one symmetric key that both sides can agree to use. That's it. That's what Diffie-Hellman does for us. Now, obviously, Bob is going to have his own key, his private key. Nobody else has Bob's private key. That's why we call it the private key. Alice is going to have a private key. Nobody else has that private key but Alice. That's why we call it a private key. So the way that we're able to create a symmetric key that is identical on both sides without ever sending that symmetric key across the network is that Bob will get Alice's public key, because Alice's public key is available to everybody. That's why we call it a public key. Alice is going to get Bob's public key, and that is also a key that's available to anybody. That's why we call it a public key. So now we've got two keys here. Bob has his private key and Alice's public key. Alice has her private key and Bob's public key. But both of these keys are completely different. Those two keys, those two pairs of keys that we've got are completely different, but thanks to the magic of asymmetric encryption and the way it operates, you can perform the Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm on this, and Bob will create a symmetric key from his private key and Alice's public key. The part that's amazing with this is that Alice will do exactly the same formula to her private key and Bob's public key and get exactly the same symmetric key. That's the magic of Diffie-Hellman. That's the magic of using public and private key pairs. This symmetric key is never sent across the network. We're only using publicly available keys that are available. And the only way you're able to do this is combining those two things together. It's like magic. And that's how you're able to get an identical symmetric key on both sides without ever having to send that symmetric key over the network. It's one of the very valuable types of asymmetric cryptography and one of the things you can use. But notice here, and this is important, I bring this up in my latest videos, is there's no encryption going on here yet. This is Diffie-Hellman. When you hear the words Diffie-Hellman key exchange, it's not someone who's encrypting data by using Diffie-Hellman key exchange. It's a way of creating a symmetric key that then could be used to encrypt data. The Diffie-Hellman key exchange is the one that is creating the symmetric key for you. So I mentioned that this is a function of asymmetric cryptography, but it's not a type of asymmetric encryption. That's an important distinction and one you absolutely need to know for the exam. So that's why a number of you have said, well, Sam needs to create the symmetric key. She needs Jack's public key, and that's absolutely correct. Sam needs Jack's public key. 44% of you said that that's what she needs, and you're absolutely right. If you answered A, 44% of you got that one absolutely right. To create this with Diffie-Hellman, we don't need a symmetric key sent from Jack that's encrypted with Jack's public key. In fact, if we got a public key, if we got a key that was encrypted with Jack's public key, or if we got anything encrypted with Jack's public key, we would need, or Sam's public key. Well, we're just getting a key that's coming across, but that's not Diffie-Hellman. We had to send that across the network in an encrypted form to be able to get it into Sam's hands. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create a key without actually sending it across the network. That's the beauty of Diffie-Hellman. New public-private key pair that's shared for the duration of the transaction. That's not what we're using here either. Jack's private key. Jack obviously should not be sending anybody his private key. So there you go. And then a symmetric key sent from Jack that's signed with Jack's private key. Well, usually that's something that's done anyway. And that doesn't help with Diffie-Hellman either. So that's another one to keep in mind when you're working through these key exchanges and trying to figure out what we're going to do with this. That's where that's coming from. So the correct answer, again, is A, Jack's public key. As I mentioned, there is tons of cryptography information on the 501 exam. There's plenty on the 401 exam. There's an amazing amount of detail on these exams. Make sure you take plenty of notes as you're going through my videos. Make sure you refer to the exam objectives. I also have notes that I've created myself. These are my Security Plus course notes. I have some available for the 401 and the 501 that are available for purchase from my site. You can grab these notes, and I take every bit of text and graphics from my videos and put them into these course notes. I think I have some up on the screen I can show you. Here's my course notes. They're big. I think they go to page 93 or 94 in the latest version. They are extensive in the amount of information that's available. There's DNS amplification. So all those graphics and things you see in my videos, they're in the course notes. You can purchase them and download a PDF version immediately right away from my website by going to professormesser.com/securitycn. There's also a physical version. Here's a book version on paper that's made from trees. This is one that is also identical to the digital version. You're not getting anything special or new here. It's just on paper. But some people like to have a book version. It's perfect bound book version on nice glossy color paper. So it's one that is nice, high quality. I wouldn't create a book that was any other way. And it is indeed 94 pages long. So plenty of content in here for this. If you buy the book version, which is a little extra because it costs a lot to print color in a book and ship it to you. But if you get this, you also get the digital version along with it for free. So I'll give you both. So you have the option, whatever works for you. And now, of course, every one of these purchases helps keep the site going. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. Learn more about it at professormesser.com/securitycn. Let's do another question. I've got a multiple choice question available on this one for you to see. The question is that a hacking group has discovered a vulnerability with a garage door opener that would allow anyone to operate the door. Just what we want. Which kind of vulnerability would best describe this issue? Would it be a picture of me? No. Would it be A, a race condition? Would it be B, a misconfiguration? Would it be C, an embedded system vulnerability? Would it be D, improper error handling? Or would it be E, a buffer vulnerability? All of these are valid, perfectly reasonable vulnerabilities that you should know about. So I'll tell you that right off the bat. These are vulnerabilities that most of these are on both the 401 and 501, although this is written for the 501 exam. If you think you know which one of these it happens to be, to go to professormesser.com/QA. Please don't mention your answer in the chat room. You want to instead go to professormesser.com/QA and do it there. This is when you're going to get these types of questions too on the exam. These questions tend to be very verbose. There tends to be a story about the question. You have to read through the story. They're not really asking you, what is a race condition? What is a misconfiguration? What is an embedded system vulnerability? What is improper error handling? They don't ask you that on the exam. That's way too easy. They're going to give you a story like this one, where a hacking group has discovered a vulnerability with a garage door opener that would allow anyone to operate the door. What kind of vulnerability would best describe this issue? That's pretty accurate. That's a pretty good CompTIA question, if I do say so myself, and I do because I wrote that one. So let's see how we did. A number of you. How do you know you got it wrong? People in the chat room going, I got it wrong. We don't know yet. We don't know if you got it wrong. Let's have a look. Let's see how we did on this one. 74% of you said an embedded system vulnerability. 14% of you said misconfiguration. And then single digits, we got 7% that said a race condition, 4% that said improper error handling, and 2% said a buffer vulnerability. So which one would best describe this particular issue? Well, 73% or so of you said an embedded system vulnerability, and I think you're absolutely right in this particular case. We have this Internet of Things scenario where we have garage door openers, we have locks on the front of our house, we have cooling systems that we're able to access from the internet, we have video surveillance systems now, we have all of these technologies, these IP addressable technologies in our house. And I'm one of these people. I can see my garage door openers. When we started the study group, Mrs. Professor Messer was leaving. I saw my phone gave me a message that the garage door went up, so that I know that that's what the problem happened to be, that something was going on. It wasn't a problem. She's leaving. So it gave me notification of that. So I'm notified, and I can push buttons to open and close my garage door from here without having the garage door opener. So this Internet of Things is pretty nice, but all of these systems are these self-contained embedded systems. We don't have access to the operating system. We don't have access to update the systems. We don't know even what operating system they're running on most of the time. Most of these devices are connected actively to the internet. And if somebody is able to access the other side of this, they would have access to this garage door opener as well. The problem is that usually we can't even upgrade these. There's no screen on them. There's no keyboard. We don't really access them directly. We don't really have, at least not normally. Maybe there is a way to access it directly, but we as the consumer don't usually have access to that. We have a problem with that. A good example of a problem, this is not a garage door, but perhaps even one that's a little bit worse, was with when Vault 7 was released in June of 2017. It was just over a year ago, is that Linksys and D-Link routers had vulnerabilities associated with them that allowed both the CIA and really anyone else who knew about the vulnerability to gain access to those systems. They could get your administrative password, install their own firmware, and start collecting information about what you're doing on the internet. This isn't a proof of concept. These are things that were actually occurring that finally got notified. So we had to get upgrades for these systems because these embedded operating systems were vulnerable to these types of problems. And in our question, it was vulnerable for our garage door opener as well. So if you did choose C, embedded system vulnerability, 75% of you did choose that one. You were absolutely right. This was not a race condition. This is not a situation where one thing was happening at the same time as something else, and it created a conflict when both of those tried to do something before or after each other. It's not a misconfiguration. We were doing the right thing. We configured this device exactly the way we were expected to. We had all of the right security controls that were put in place by the garage door opener manufacturer, but we still had a problem. So it wasn't a misconfiguration. Improper error handling. We have no information here about any error that was occurring or how that error was being handled. So that wasn't the problem in this particular question. And a buffer vulnerability would be another very specific type of vulnerability. In our question, it didn't talk about buffers. It didn't talk about overloading a buffer or a variable. In this case, that would not be the accurate answer either. The best answer, and the question did ask which vulnerability would best describe this issue, is an embedded system vulnerability. And that would be the right answer. So if you chose C, you got that one absolutely right. Let's do another one. I've got another one. we can go through this question. See if I can show the right thing on my screen. Here it is. The question we have now is about Android devices. The question is, which of these would be the best way to connect two Android devices directly together for a file transfer? Well, that sounds like something I could use for my Android devices. Would the correct answer be A, MMS? Would it be B, USB OTG? Would it be C, routing? Would it be D, 802.11ac? Or would it be E, an SD card? Which of these would be the best way to connect two Android devices directly together for a file transfer? MMS, USB OTG, routing, 802.11ac, and an SD card. If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA. You'll be able to make that happen. Hopefully that's one you were able to find here as well. See, some of you even done this before. Some of you don't have an Android device. You're wondering, what in the world are you talking about? And what are all these crazy abbreviations on the screen? That's also something you may want to consider as well, knowing what those are. Every single one of those, the MMS, the USB OTG, the 802.11ac, and the SD, are all real things. So you need to know what all of those real things are if you're going to be taking this exam, because they're all in the SY0501 exam objectives. Make sure you know those SY. This is definitely an SY0501 question. No question about that in knowing what those are. Go to professormesser.com/QA. You can answer that one. All right, getting a warm beverage there. Thank you for your indulgence. So let's see how we did. A number of you have already answered this one already. So let's flip back over and see how did we do. Well, let's see. If we go, we have a majority in this case. 56% of you said USB OTG. USB OTG. So that is one that a lot of you have said, well, that's what you should do, but it's only 57, 58% of you. 21% of you said 802.11ac, which sounds like a pretty good idea as well. 13% of you said MMS. We'll talk about how MMS can be used to transfer files on an Android device. 5% of you said an SD card, and 3% of you said routing. So make sure we also look at the question when we're answering these. The question asked, which of these would be the best way to connect two Android devices directly together for a file transfer? So that's a pretty important consideration. It's kind of hard to see with my head there, but now you can see directly together for the file transfer. So the problem is that you do have to know what some of these abbreviations are, and probably more importantly, how they operate. You need to understand, how does MMS operate? How does USB OTG operate? What is routing? How does 802.11ac operate? How does SD card operate? So that's the real question. Some people in the chat room are going, but this is more secure than the other one. That wasn't the question. The question here had nothing to do with security. The question talked about the best way to connect two Android devices directly together. And for the options you had, A through E, the only one that allows you to connect two Android devices directly together in any way, shape, or form is USB on the go. USB OTG, that's what the OTG stands for, is on the go. This allows, it's a very standardized form of USB that allows you to connect two devices directly to each other with a USB cable, and that's it. You don't need anything else to be able to do that. And USB is pretty smart. Your mobile device, for example, can be both a host and a device, which means it can be a storage device, or it can be sending device into another machine from your mobile device that has that there. So that's one that becomes pretty handy. So you don't need a separate drive or SD card or something else as an intermediary. You can simply connect directly together with USB OTG. It's part of the USB 2.0 standard, and it's very common to see on Android devices, not seen at all on Apple iOS devices. So if you're an Apple user like me and you see USB OTG and you're wondering, what in the world are you talking about? You don't really see it anywhere else but mobile devices, although it is part of the standard. But that is one that you do need to know for the 501 exam. Comes directly from the SY0501 section 2.5. The video that I make available is mobile device enforcement, where that is mentioned. Pretty convenient to have it there From a security perspective, probably too convenient. That's why a number of security professionals will disable USB OTG if you are using your mobile device in an enterprise environment. So that is one that does become a little useful to have, but may be disabled depending on what's going on. So let's look at your possible answers. USB OTG B was the correct answer. 58% of you did choose B, USB OTG. That was indeed the correct answer. Well done with that. 21% of you said 802.11ac. 802.11ac, of course, is a very good way to transfer files, to connect to the network, to browse the internet, but it's not a direct connection. You have to have some type of 802.11ac access point in the middle. And of course, I didn't mention here any ad hoc, so we weren't really talking about ad hoc 802.11ac in this particular case either. So in this case, it wouldn't be D 802.11ac. 12% said MMS, the multimedia transfer, text messaging, the multimedia, which is how we mostly do it these days. Not a very good way to connect to do file transfers. And of course, there is no direct connection there. You have to send that MMS message to your mobile provider, and then it may even go to a different mobile provider and come down to someone else's Android phone. That's definitely not a direct connection. 5% said an SD card. There's no direct connection there either. You have to have some type of SD card in the middle to make this work. Not the right answer here in our case. And rooting the system, getting access to the operating system of the device, has nothing to do with directly connecting and doing a file transfer. Only 3% of you thought that might be the answer anyway. Indeed, it was B, USB OTG. The 59% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done with that. There were a number of people that came to my website, I was noticing this month. And in fact, I did even see a couple questions about this on the CompTIA subreddit, where people were trying to take the 501 exam and they needed more information. They weren't in a security role. In fact, they might have even taken the exam before, didn't do well, and they're wondering, now what do I do? And one of the things I always mention is you need to watch the videos, you need a good book, you need Q&A, but you also need a lot of good hands-on. That's why the folks at GTS Learning have created their live labs, where you can get hands-on training for all of these devices that you might be using. And they've created live labs that you can connect to and be able to use on your systems. There's live labs available for Security Plus, A Plus, Network Plus, and much more. And you can get them directly from the GTS Learning website. I'm on the live labs right now. I was looking through some that had a lab set up for NAT and OpenSSH. So this one had a Windows server. So here's a domain controller. Got other devices in here that I'm connecting to. And this is all very fast connection. This one's got Kali Linux on it. And it tells you exactly what you need to do. You can step through the entire process as you're going here and gives you screenshots and exactly how you should log in, what you should choose, how you should connect via SSH. And it's all done from this screen that allows you to very easily step back and forth over a remote connection. So you're not on a rail. You're able to move around the operating system and do whatever you'd like. If you'd like to follow this exact step-by-step, you can do that. Or if you're like me, you just want to run Wireshark. Let's see what we can find. We'll start up Wireshark. I'm not following the instructions at all. Looks like I was even doing some in here right now. Let's run a capture. Oh, there's no interfaces on here. So they probably have you load up a file. Let's see if there's any files on here. It's a recent file. Let's see what's opening. See if there's, vulnerable network captures. Let's open vulnerable network capture number 1. So we can just go through this capture file. So obviously part of this lab is going through this very vulnerable capture file. Look how fast it is though. This is a remote desktop. So this is one where it's all local on my machine. What's also nice about this, you don't have to load any software. You don't have to do anything special on your computer. You just open up a browser. And if you follow my link, you get some money off of this. So don't go to the GTS Learning website directly. You'll pay $169. If you go to professormesser.com/seclabs, then you'll pay $125. And you'll get access to this. You'll get their book. You've got Q&A that they provide with that. All of the details about this and the things you need to know that come with this are all available on the GTS Learning website. You can find out all about their live labs at professormesser.com/seclabs. And that's a good place to go if you need a little more hands-on. I think that might be the thing that puts you over the top if you're ever wondering what you should be working on for the exam. You need a little bit of extra stick time, a little bit of time figuring out how all of this stuff works together. That's a great way to do it. Let's go through and do another question. I've got some more multiple choice questions. Here's one that's definitely an SY0501 question. This question asks, which of the following would be a characteristic of an immutable system? Which of the following would be a characteristic of an immutable system? Would it be A, all updates are applied to the existing iteration? Would it be B, it requires all previous iterations to build on the current version? Would it be C, security is validated across all iterations? And D, minor updates to existing iterations are common. So that would be the characteristic of an immutable system. If you think you know the answer, you can go to professormesser.com/QA and answer that yourself. In the chat room, some people are asking if there's ever a live Q&A where people are able to ask me questions directly. Of course, right after we're done here, we got 15 minutes left in this Q&A, and then I open up the phone lines. I'll open up the lines. You can call in. You can call in for free on Skype. You can call in free anywhere in the continental United States or around the world on Skype and ask a question directly. Sure, why not? Of course there would. People are saying, why would he do that? That's crazy. There could be no case where he would ever do something like that, except we're going to do it in 15 minutes. So that's I know it is, and you're right. It is a little crazy. What is that about? So stick around for the after show. That's what we call our study group after show, where you're able to call in, ask questions in the chat room, talk to me directly. We'll have a conversation. It's open phone lines. You can talk about anything you'd like. You can talk about anything but what might get you in trouble at Thanksgiving. So no politics, no religion, but anything else. I think we're pretty good with that. We can talk about those. Let's first talk, though, about immutable systems. Immutable systems, and boy, we just don't know about immutable systems. A lot of you are Googling immutable systems right now. And I know that because we've got a tie for first, a three-way tie. So we got, 38%. If we went with the answer that got most people is security is validated across all iterations. That would be what people think is the characteristic of an immutable system. 30% said all updates are applied to the existing iteration. 27% said it requires all previous iterations to build on the current version. And then D said minor updates to existing iterations are common. So only 4% said D. The 4% of you, I think, definitely were onto something there when you were trying to figure out the immutable system part, because that's one where just the word immutable sort of makes you think, would it really be something where people would not be using that, would be doing updates to it? No, that'd be a mutable system, would it not? Immutable systems are really important to these deployments that we do for cloud computing. It's really important for non-cloud computing as well. It's really part of a standard business process that allows you to properly deploy application instances, whether it's cloud-based or not, whether it's virtualized or not, it doesn't matter. We use this type. It's not technology. It's not a style. It's a process. We use this process to be able to easily deploy applications, and perhaps even more importantly, be able to to roll back the deployment of applications very, very easily, to have these things here. So you've got these times where you need to deploy an application and you need to make it available. And what people will do is they will build an entire instance of an application that will never change. That's the immutable part. It will never be mutated. It will never be changed to have those things there. There won't be any changes to the configuration. It is locked down. So now we're moving to a new version, we effectively update the application by moving the old one to the side and putting the new one in place. And what's nice about that is you now know exactly what's involved with this particular version. And if you need to bring the old one back, if you run into a problem, just slide the old one back in place, because you know exactly what that version of the application looked like. It's immutable. It's never going to change. If you ever need to update it, you have to create a new application instance to be able to do that. But from a security perspective, this is great, because you're never going to be in a situation where somebody updates a piece of code, they update a driver, they update an operating system file, and suddenly a security issue is created from that. Because it's immutable, nobody's going to make a change to it. You're not allowed to do that. So whenever you're going to deploy an application, you can run through all your security checks. You can make sure the application is secure. You can run through all vulnerabilities and make sure all of the vulnerabilities are updated. You don't have any problems with vulnerabilities in the operating system. And that way, when you deploy it, you know that that particular security posture is never going to change because nobody can change the code on the immutable system. And in fact, that's the real advantage we get, is that the security is validated across all iterations of these immutable systems that you create. This becomes very, very useful from a security perspective. If you're trying to manage this and systems are changing all the time and people are updating code and there's no change control process, you can very, very, very easily open a security hole or create a security vulnerability that you were not available to have there. So all updates are applied to the existing iteration. Nope, you'd never do that with an immutable system, so it would not be A. So B was that requires all previous iterations to build on the current version. That's not a requirement. Your next version may be a completely different iteration. Doesn't have to build on the old one. Sometimes it does, but it does not have to. So D was that minor updates to existing iterations are common. In fact, they are prohibited. You do not create minor updates to existing iterations, and that's why only 3% of you chose D. So the answer would be C. Security is validated across iterations. We didn't get a majority, but we did get a large number. 45% of you did choose security is validated across all iterations. So that is a good group of you. We got almost 50% there. I'll take it. I think that's the right number we were shooting for. In the chat room, people are asking, is it a company policy? Is it a developer thing? It is a set of processes and procedures that has to be followed by a company, very similar to the processes and procedures that are put together for doing change control. So it's probably part of the entire process. Business process management is probably where this best is described as fitting in an organization. And if you're an organization that you create your own apps, you deploy them a lot. I used to work for a third-party call center as a senior director of voice and data networking, and we had to update and change these systems all the time. When I got there, people would just put a patch. We were running a new version. When I left, we had put together a business process management where we had created a process where now we had to be given either the image or the system that would then be swapped out to be able to know exactly what was going on with that. And it's a good thing that we did. If you are watching this study group for continuing education credit, and although this is becoming less important these days because of Cert Master CE, but I'll certainly be able to provide one for you. All you have to do is go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. There is a link there that says contact us. It's really contact me. There's no us here. It's just me in the room. There's nobody else here but me hanging out. So contact us. In there, it asks for your name, your email address. Make sure those are correct. And it has a box there for you to put some text in there to me. You can put anything you'd like. I read through all of these. I'm the one that's sitting in front of the television sending these out once a week. But you're able to put anything in there. But the important thing is you need to put a message in there that has somewhere in there the word immutable. That is our special secret keyword of the month, immutable. So if you put immutable, I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E, immutable, I'll know that you must have watched up to this point because you knew the super secret code word. You can do this whether you're watching live or whether you're watching on a replay years from now. You're able to send me a message with that word immutable, and sometime in the next 7 days after that, that's how I generally will do it. You will get an email from me, a digitally signed message that says, you must have seen this. This hereby certifies that you got 1 hour of a webinar-based CEU for CompTIA. Of course, you use this for other things as well. But that's one of the things that I make available just for hanging out here. Be glad to provide you with that study group CEU. Let's do another question. We got more to go through. Well, let's do one now that can really ask us about authentication. So the question is that a security administrator would like to use an authentication factor that can't be forgotten or left at home. Which of these authentication factors would be the best choice? Would it be A, somewhere you are? Would it be B, something you have? Would it be C, something you are? Or would it be D, something you know? This is where we need to know authentication factors pretty well. And you'd absolutely need to know authentication factors for both the 401 and the 501 exam. So the question was, a security administrator would like to use an authentication factor that can't be forgotten or left at home. This is a security administrator that clearly works with me. Which of these authentication factors would be the best choice? Would it be A, somewhere you are, B, something you are, no, excuse me, A is somewhere you are, B is something you have, C is something you are, and D is something you know? I'm so sorry, people who are listening in on the podcast and trying to decipher what I am saying with these. Hopefully it's one that has not been too much of a problem for you to have to deal with. Hopefully that's one. I think we may do pretty well on this one. I'm going to take a sneak peek at how we're doing with this one. This may be one we have to think about for a moment, because if I was taking this on an exam, I know what I would choose initially, and I'm not sure that's what I would choose for this. Yes, it's good that this is not graded. People in the chat room know that when you lock in your answer, it is locked in. There's no way to go back and change your answer after the fact. So you're like me. I would choose, there's probably one I would choose immediately, and I'd think, oh, wait, no, it needs to be something else. I think that's how I would approach this particular question. So some of you may get that one correct or incorrect, or work through those other pieces too. Hopefully it's one you were able to know. For those of you that have worked with these types of authentication factors before, this may be one you're able to work with. Oh, so if you log out and back in, is that the same thing as a back button in Socrative? Does that get you back to the question? That would be nice. I wonder why there isn't a back button question in the questions. Maybe that's one I need to send in as something that people should be able to work through and know what those are. Well, a number of you have answered this one, so let's go to the answers and see how we did. Only got 4 answers here. It's almost like a real exam in this scenario. And this one we got certainly well over a majority. 79% of you said C, something you are. Now that's the one that I might have finally gotten to. Initially, I would have probably looked in this and said A, somewhere you are. 5% of you did say A, somewhere you are. 7% of you said B, something you have, which is 7%. And then 9% said D, something you know. So the real question with this one was really looking at what the requirements were. So the security administrator wants to use an authentication factor that can't be forgotten. So already there's a number of issues associated with this one that are a choice, or left at home. So there's your 2 examples. So already you can think of the things that could be forgotten or the things that could be left at home. You know already there should be some authentication factors going through your head there. Yes, those in the chat room asking if this was multiple choice. As you can see on the screen, this is a multiple choice question. Yes. A, B, C, or D. So let's go through these and let's talk about which one. We know 79% of you said something you are. And the reason something you are would work is because, generally speaking, this is biometrics. This is something like a fingerprint, an iris scan. This is something you can't forget it because it's part of you. You can't leave it at home because it's part of you. This is the beauty of biometrics, is that it's always connected to you. You always have your fingerprints with you. You always have your iris with you. This is obviously not storing a picture of your fingerprint or a picture of your iris. It's usually creating some type of mathematical representation of your fingerprint or your iris. These days, our biometrics are even our faces. Our phones are doing face recognition. So it's able to provide biometrics. We're not going to leave our face at home. We're not going to forget our face today. So that becomes useful. It becomes handy. This is also difficult to change. Your fingerprint, you can change it, but it's really hard to change it. Normally, you're not doing that unless you're trying to maybe get out of the country. You can't change your face. The face recognition technologies are remarkable. They're able to do face recognition. If you got glasses on, you got a beard, whatever it happens to be. And the problem with biometrics is they're not perfect. If you've ever had to log in with a fingerprint, it didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time. Finally worked the third time. It doesn't always work. It's not perfect. But it is very effective when it does work. So in very specific situations, this can be very, very useful to have, especially when used in conjunction with other authentication factors. So you might put in a username and a password and your fingerprint. Well, it's nice to have that extra authentication factor there and available. So if you didn't answer C, something you are, 79% of you got that one right. Now, 5% of you said A, somewhere you are. Now, obviously, you being somewhere isn't something you can forget, and it's not something you can leave at home. If you, wherever you go, there you are. The problem is, how does an authentication factor know where you are? And today, our authentication factors know where we are based on some type of GPS coordinates, generally speaking. To be able to find those GPS coordinates, you need to have your phone with you. So the somewhere you are authentication factor requires that you have a GPS with you. And if you forget it, leave it at home, that's not going to be a good authentication factor. That one does not meet the requirements we had. B is something you have. Well, by definition, if I have a smart card, if I have a token generator, if I have something with me that helps me authenticate, then I can forget it and I can leave it at home. So that wouldn't work either. And something you know would be like a password. And again, the question really talked about forgetting things. Something you know, like a password. We never forget our passwords, right? That never happens. Those of you that are on help desk duty, you know password calls, that's probably your highest percentage of calls coming through. Certainly one of the highest. I forgot my password. Could you reset my password, please? Thank you. Then you have to go through the whole process. Let's validate who you are. You probably have your own validation system. Do you know your ID number? Do you know your employee ID? Do you have this information? Blah, blah, blah. Can we text you? That type of thing. So that's one where you would absolutely forget it. So the only choice that you have here on the authentication factors that would be the best choice in this list would be C, indeed. Something you are. And that is the right answer for 79% of you. So really didn't fool very many people with the something you are. That was an easy one for most of you. This is all of these questions, by the way, come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. Make sure if you are starting your studies, if you're in the middle of your studies, if you're ready to take your exam and you're not sure if you're ready to take your exam, these set of exam objectives will answer every question you have. They are comprehensive. They are extensive. Those are two similar words that they say the same thing. Those are two different words that say exactly the same thing. That you need these exam objectives. Make sure that if you don't have them, that you stop your studies right now and you go to professormesser.com/objectives, or just go to the Google machine and type in CompTIA exam objectives. Make sure you download the version of the objectives that match the version of the exam that you're going to take, which sounds obvious, but is not at the moment, because there's two different Security Pluses. This is going to be nice after July 31st, by the way. There'll only be one for at least 3 years. But right now, make sure you download the right one, because downloading the wrong one will be a bad scene. You don't want that. You want to get the right one. It has tons of information. You can use this as a checklist. So as you're going through and trying to figure out, do I know everything I need to know before I sit down for the exam? This will tell you. This gives you all of the feedback you need to be able to understand if you're really ready to walk in the door of your exam. So make sure you take advantage of those. Everything you learned today, everything we talked about, everything in my videos comes directly from this. This is what I use to create every single one of my videos. I cross them out as I go along. You should do exactly the same thing. You can find all of that at professormesser.com/objectives. Well, we've come to the end of an hour of Q&A. Is that possible? That's okay. We still have more Q&A to go. Except this time you'll be asking me the questions. Stick around for the after show. I'll open up the phone lines. We'll take questions from the chat room. We'll have a lot of things going on. We have another Security Plus study group already scheduled for July the 25th. Normally we do these on the third Wednesday of the month, but here in the United States, July 4th is a national holiday. It's Independence Day here in the U.S. So the first Wednesday of July, I've already just crossed out that whole week. Nobody's going to want to do anything that week, so we're not going to do a study group on July the 4th. The A+ study group will be on July the 11th. The Network Plus study group will be on July 18th. And the next Security Plus study group will be on July 25th. Feel free to stick around on the website until next month. We can do another one of these. If this is well past July 25th, or you're just not sure when the next live event is going to be, you can always go to the Professor Messer website. Right at the top, list on the menus as the calendar, or you can simply go to professormesser.com/calendar, find out when the next live event is going to be. Well, as I mentioned, we've got plenty more in the after show that we're going to go through, but we've also got the things we talked about today. My course notes are available at professormesser.com/securitycn, the CN for course notes. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, professormesser.com/YouTube, on Twitter, professormesser.com/Twitter, on Facebook, professormesser.com/Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. Go to type in professormesser.com/Instagram, /LinkedIn, /Facebook. So you just put the social networking thing you would like to find me on, and if I'm on it, you will find it right there. Don't forget about the voucher discounts at professormesser.com/vouchers. And of course, my thanks to GTS Learning and their live labs. The special pricing is available to you at professormesser.com/seclabs. Well, that brings us to the end of the formal Q&A that we have for today. Stick around for the next hour. Otherwise, we will see you next time on the Security Plus Study Group. Well, we've got to bring up the phone lines now. I will be taking questions from the chat room. Those of you wondering, why would he do such a thing? Well, I can't argue with that. I think that's pretty spot on, quite honestly. Why would I do that? So let's get the phone lines up and running. If everyone will bear with me a moment. I'm the only one here, so I get to do my own producing of the show. So let's start up a show. We'll reset the show. I've got things to click in on my side. Then I will tell you exactly the way that you can also start the show and call into the show in just a moment. Let me call in first. I get to call into the show as well. We both get to call in. Let's turn on some things so I can hear what's going on. And then it says, well, you're welcome. And then I have to type in some things here on my screen that you can't hear because you'll do a decode.
Enter your 6-digit PIN number.
That's redundant. All right. And I'll put in my 6-digit PIN number.
Welcome.
Well, there you go. Welcome. It must have worked. So because of that, if you were calling anywhere from the continental United States, you can call in toll free 855-785-7545. If you are on Skype, you can call in anywhere in the world for free on Skype by putting a +1 at the beginning, +1 855-785-RJ45. The first question from the chat room is, if you have the choice, you've been studying, is the 401 or the 501 easier? Well, neither one's really easier than the other. They're both probably similar in their difficulty levels. So that's not the issue. The issue is you've not been studying for both, I assure you. Nobody is, because they are so different that you would not be studying for both exams. You'd be studying for one or the other. So make sure that you just take the exam that matches the one you have been studying, which is probably the more important part of this. So it's one of those things to keep in mind that you need to study for and take the same numbered exam. If you study for 401, take the 401 exam. If you study for the 501, take the 501 exam. People are asking how long would I recommend studying for taking the exam? I would recommend studying for however long it takes to learn everything that's listed in the CompTIA exam objectives. Most people, on average, that takes 3 to 6 months. Some people have been in the industry a while, it takes them 2 weeks. Just depends on what you already know. So that's the important part, is that it's not about how long I would recommend, it's how long will it take you to get through all of those exam objectives. That's really the most important part. That's what you should be using as your checklist. There's other questions also available coming in on the phone lines. So let's go to the 435 area code. Hello, caller. Thanks for calling. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Joseph, and I'm calling from Logan, Utah.
Oh, well, thanks for calling. What can we do for you today?
Hey, I was just wondering, when will the 401 be offered until?
Well, fortunately, if you've been studying for the 401, you don't have a lot of time left. July 31st, a month or so from today, is your last chance to take that exam. People will be taking this exam, by the way, on July 31st. So don't feel bad if you're someone who's trying to study and get to that 401 exam, but you have to make sure you pass it before July 31st, or it's gone forever. You're going to have to shift gears and move over to the 501 exam.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling. It's one of those where I don't recommend people wait until the last day. Obviously, you don't want to do that. But people will be doing it because we're human beings and we study and we're running out of time. And okay, let's take on the last day. Sometimes it's just life. Life does that to you. Back to the phones really quick. Let's do the 616 area code. What's your name, caller? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Michael. I'm calling from Michigan.
Hi, Michael. What can we do for you today?
Hi, I have this, hold on, let me mute the stream here real quick. I have this weird question that showed up on my Kaplan IT training thing. The question itself was pretty easy, but it asked me about virtual machine attacks, and they're not detailed anywhere in the notes. I was just wondering if you could give me a little more insight on them. There's just 3 of them.
There is a little bit of information about VM-type attacks in the CompTIA exam objectives for both 401 and 501, probably a little more in the 501, but there's not a lot there. They don't go into a lot of detail on the VM attacks that are there. In fact, I can probably bring those out. Most of them deal with just breakouts. Others are not necessarily attacks. In the exam objectives, for example, on the 501, they talk about things like VM sprawl, which isn't really an attack. It's really more of you just being disorganized. But it does speak to the security of the VM systems. Most of the time, it's a breakout situation where you can have all of these VMs running on a service that is managing all these VMs, and somebody's able to jump from one VM into the hypervisor or jump from VM to VM. And in my videos, I describe an example of this that was done with VMware, where they demonstrated this in a closed environment at a trade show, where they were able to go from virtual machine to virtual machine, which you should never be able to do, but they were able to do that. And that's probably one of the biggest worries for people dealing with VMs, is people able to break out of those and move from VM to VM. It's not something you want to run into. What were the things on this particular question that were throwing you?
It's just they went by specific name. One of them was Scooby-Doo.
Right.
Another one is a red pill attack, and the last one is an LDT attack. Well,
fortunately, none of these specific attack types are ever listed in the exam objectives. Fortunately, because the number of vulnerability types that are out there are extensive. So anytime you're running into a study question that is asking you or querying you about a specific type of vulnerability by name, it's something that's well outside the scope of the exam objectives, fortunately. It would have to be something very, very extensive and pervasive for us to ever have that particular vulnerability name stuck in our lexicon. So if you run into something like back in the day, it was the I Love You attack. These days, it's more of the Heartbleed is one of the more popular attacks. If it makes the traditional CNN, Fox News, MSNBC media, then it probably is one that they would, you could expect to someone hear about. But none of these vulnerability names are listed in the exam objectives, and I wouldn't even bother going down that road.
Okay, I was just curious because the question was which one isn't a VM attack.
Right.
And the answer was man in the middle. I just figured it lists the rest of them. I might have to know them. I don't know.
The problem is that there's so many of those answers are so well outside the scope of what you would ever be expected to know from the exam objectives that it's not worth going there. You could spend a week or two going through all of the vulnerabilities that have been identified for anything in the last year, and you would still not be through all of them, and you'd still have to remember their names. My perspective is, if it's not in the exam objectives, don't bother going down that road. They're going to stick to the exam objectives for your exam. And it's also one of these things that, what are you going to do? Start studying things that aren't on the exam objectives because you think it might show up on the exam? That's not a good way to study either. Stick to the objectives and you're going to do fine.
That sounds perfectly logical. Thank you for your time, Professor.
Best of luck, Michael. That's always a good best practice in my mind, because there are probably things that will show up on your exam that are not in the exam objectives. CompTIA will occasionally ask questions that aren't graded, and they just throw these things out to see if you can, of course, know what these things happen to be. And other times and of course they say this in the exam objectives, is that they can ask you anything. It may not be in this list. My perspective is, if you stick to this list and you know everything in this list, those very few times where they would ever go off script will be irrelevant, because you know everything else. So that's the important thing in my mind that you stick with. Let's talk to my neck of the woods, 850 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, I'm actually calling from Florida, and I have a couple of questions regarding to meaning of the Security Plus certification in general.
Okay.
So first of all, I want to thank you for your YouTube videos regarding 401.
Sure.
They're really helpful and very detailed, so I certainly appreciate those being free and available. Basically, I'm taking Security Plus exam in 2 weeks, actually, but it's 401, so I have to obviously make sure to pass it, which I think I will, because I'm feeling pretty confident, and hopefully, I will pass it. But the question that I really had is, obviously, you are in this industry for a couple of years, and I was just wondering how crucial is having the Security Plus certification to be able to advance in like any type of IT career.
Well, one of the things that is probably kind of a misnomer of certifications in general is that the value of a certification is what you end up doing with it. So, and everybody has a different goal and perspective of what they want to do with their certifications. Some people use these certifications as a way to move up an existing organization. Some people use these certifications to get a job or get a better job. And of course, if you're looking at job descriptions and the job descriptions themselves say you need to have a Security Plus to have this job, then that's a pretty obvious one. Now, we're in Florida. This isn't something where we usually run into a federal position, but there are some federal jobs in Florida where you might run into this, is that the federal government requires that you have a minimum set of certifications to work in IT for the federal government. And one of the minimum requirements they have is the Security Plus exam. So I have a number of people that come to my site just to get the Security Plus so they can work for this federal organization or an organization that works with the federal government. So that's one of the situations you'll find. Some employers, though, they don't care about your certifications. They don't think that's important at all. In fact, they prefer hiring people who aren't certified because in their mind, they can hire you for less money and then they'll just train you as you go. I think ultimately, certification should be about what you want to get out of it. Whenever I take a Microsoft certification, whenever I take a technology certification, I'm always learning things I didn't know. Otherwise, I wouldn't be taking the certification to begin with. So when I go through a Palo Alto Network certification or I go through a Microsoft certification, I remember the first time I went through Microsoft certifications and said, oh, that's what Active Directory is. Suddenly the lights went on in my head. Oh, I get it now, what they're doing with this. I was able to use that knowledge of Active Directory back in the Windows NT4 days, and I used that knowledge, and of course built on that knowledge as Microsoft updated their operating systems, but I used that knowledge for the rest of my career. The last part of my career I was working for as a senior systems engineer for a firewall company, and we would need to integrate the firewall to Active Directory. And of course, there were all these questions about how you connect it and what the forests are and what the trust relationships are and how you connect into the Active Directory. And is it going to be through LDAP? And I already knew all those things. I didn't have to relearn what Active Directory was, even though I was working with a product that was not a Microsoft product. So there's lots of good reasons to get a certification. Not all of those reasons are the same for every single person.
Okay, makes perfect sense, because I think that I already have an A+. I got certified a year ago. So I think that it would be a good starting point to basically be able to know things that you are obviously going to need in basically really any IT field. And also it's a good way to test what you know, because I'm not taking classes in college, but this test is, a whole separate type of test. So it's also a way to be able to determine if you really got what it takes to at least find an entry-level IT position, for example.
I think that's absolutely the case. And I think that's a good positioning of A plus, Network plus, or Security plus. And all of these really work together. If you're someone who ends up being a server administrator, you're going to get that update every month from Microsoft that shows all the vulnerabilities that came through. You're going to have to patch them, and they're going to describe these vulnerabilities as being a command execution, a vulnerability, a buffer overflow, and you're going to know what those things are. You're going to know, oh, that's a pretty bad problem. Let's patch that one first, and you're going to be able to set priorities. They all build on each other.
Okay, makes perfect sense. I think that should be all. Thank you so much for your text, Professor.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling. That's something you always do run into, though. And going back to the question about certifications, should I get a certification? What should we do with these certifications? People tend to try to shoehorn a certification into being something that perhaps it is not. The certification stands alone on itself. It is certifications are used for very particular purposes, and they don't take the place of anything else. A lot of people say, well, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to get certifications. Those are two different things. You can't swap one out for the other. There's a reason to get a formal degree, and it's a different reason to get a formal degree than it is to get a set of certifications. Certifications don't replace a formal degree. A formal degree doesn't replace certifications. Same thing for anything else that helps you get a job or get a better job, which I think most of us are working towards in our industry. Not only do we need to know about these things, and I think getting a certification is a great way to learn these technologies yourself, but we're always trying to figure out what the next thing is. And being able to take these certifications and show a prospective employer, here's what I've been working on, and here's one aspect of it becomes important. A lot of people also think that that's the only thing that you would ever use when you're working on some type of job. Is that, well, I have a certification. Let me wheel in my certification. Boom, we'll put it on the table. I've got a certification. You should hire me. It's not how certifications work. It's not how hiring works. Where do people even get that straw man? That's why you would get hired. I have a certification, therefore I get hired. That has nothing to do with it. It is not nothing to do with it. It's a piece of what you're doing. You don't wheel in a certification in a wheelbarrow and stick it on the table and say, I'm ready to be hired now. You're going to have to answer questions. Who do you know at this company? What do you think about this company? What other things have you done? Do you have a lab you've been working on? What do you do in your current job? What types of things are you looking to do in the future? All of these things that you have that make up you as a whole are the things that are going to be able to get you hired for your next job. It's not any one thing. It's not any one place you went to school. It's not any one place you got a certification. And in my particular case, I ended up doing something where now none of my certifications are valuable. I got all these security certifications. I guess they were valuable in that I can use this now to help you learn what these are in these certifications, but nobody hired me for this job. I'm the one. I'm the only one. So running the company. So that's one of those situations where they're used in different ways. I would have never expected that the certifications I got would be helping me do this. And yet that's exactly how it turned out. I always thought I'd be just moving up the ranks and we'd be doing this and I'd be finding a job and we'd be doing, technical things, or I'd be implementing firewalls and et cetera. But you just never know where those things are going to go. Okay. Reminder, we got some lines open still at 855-785-7545. You're also able to put questions into the chat room. If you're here live, you can go to the live event chat at professormesser.com/live, and you can ask questions in there about things you're trying to figure out, not just with Security Plus or things with certification or things with technology in general, but you have other questions as well. You're more than welcome to call in or ask the questions in the chat room as well. There's a lot that's been going on this past month with privacy. That's because the big privacy laws in Europe were finally rolled out. After years and years of warning us that this would happen, it finally did. That's why when you go to a website these days, you have all of these questions that pop up about, here's our new privacy policy. Here's an email I'm sending you about our privacy policy. We've changed our privacy policy. Have you noticed that we have a different privacy policy now? And that's because all of these rules in Europe are now applying really to any site that anyone in Europe would ever connect to. The problem for people that are outside Europe is that even though we're not in Europe, the laws would still apply to us if someone from Europe was connecting to our site. And I got plenty of people from Europe connecting to my site. So I have a new privacy policy. Really not new. I just updated it. In fact, it gave me a chance to really say, here's what I collect, here's how I use it, and here's how you can tell me to get rid of it if you want me to. And that's fine. Those types of things have always been on my site, but I'm now able to be more specific with it. In fact, people will ask me all the time, what type of things do you collect? And now I can say, I documented it all in my privacy policy. It's up to date. You'll find those things there. But I was reading an article today that the study was done in the United Kingdom about how people have been approached about how they use their data. And they tried to make it something that was very dark and very evil with how we do this. But I have to collect data. If you come to my website, you're in the chat right now, you had to put something in. You had to give me some type of name and ideally some type of email so that I can allow you to chat on my website. I can't get around that. If you purchase products on my site and I need to ship it to you, then I need to know your address. And sometimes people don't want to give me their address, but they want me to ship them something. I thought, well, we're at an impasse because I cannot get this to you unless I get your address. But they're rightly concerned about their privacy. So I get it. I understand. And we find a way to make it happen. So those are the types of things you will run into now over the next, I guess we're getting out of the privacy part of it, but it's still such an important piece of that and what we do. So another one of those things to look for when you're trying to figure out, where's this come from? Where's it go? Who keeps this data and what do they do with it? I think a lot of people think the worst. Oh, they're collecting the data to figure out what you eat so that when you come back into the store, they'll present you with advertising about things you eat. Like, I don't know that every store is getting down to that level of detail. I personally don't care what you eat. So that's a good example of that. The chat room, some folks asking, what type of jobs can I do with Security Plus? Can you give any real life examples? Well, somebody who was in the security part of the industry, the industry itself, the security industry really didn't take off until, I don't know, just over 10 years ago. This was near the end of the 2000s and kind of right at that point, really more like 15 years. We've really been ramping up with security. And really over the last 10 has it really become an industry unto its own. The types of jobs, though, vary quite a bit. People are very concerned about what jobs can I get with Security Plus? And really the question is, what types of jobs would someone with a Security Plus certification have? The certification itself doesn't get you the job, but it does help qualify you for certain jobs. And I think for the most part in the information technology side, I think most people don't start in security. From what I found, and I'm somebody I come from a firewall company where I was the field systems engineer. So I would go to 3 or 4 companies a day and talk to their security teams. And most of their security teams are people that started off on the networking side and they moved into security. Somebody was mentioning this in my chat room yesterday that said, what do I need to know to manage enterprise firewalls? Do I need to know networking or do I need to know security? And the answer is you need to know both. You need to know networking to know how to configure the firewall, and you need to know security to know what the configuration should be. And those two things have to blend together. So what you'll generally find with security is people will start on the networking side, and then they will naturally migrate over to the security side. Security is a huge networking component to security, which is something I just don't hear enough of out there. Why am I the only one that says this? I'm not the only one, but it seems like at times I'm the only one yelling out, you need to know the security part after the networking. You need to get more networking foundation. It's a foundation of networking with security layered on top of it. So, for example, when I go to these places, you've got a group of people that are managing their firewalls. They're implementing intrusion prevention rules. They are consolidating all their logs into a SIM, and they're creating reports from those logs. They are configuring and setting up a client-based VPN so that people can go home and securely connect back to the corporate network. They're configuring site-to-site VPNs between their firewall and a third party and configuring policies and rules between those. They're implementing multi-factor authentication in their environments. Some environments are very unique, like a hospital is one where now everybody has a proximity badge. So when you walk up to a shared computer, it immediately knows who you are and you have the access you need. When you walk away, it locks the computer off till the next person shows up, and then it starts up and provides them with the access they need. So sometimes these security roles have some very specialized types of requirements depending on your particular vertical that you're working on. So that's just a handful. There are many, many, many more things. Mine, for example, I worked for a manufacturer of a firewall. So I would go into places and say, this is the best firewall in the world. Let me show you why I think it's the best firewall in the world based on the things you've told me. Let's plug it in. Let's connect it to your network. Let me prove to you that it can do what you think you want to have it do. We'll put it through its paces. You'll evaluate it, and then you'll buy 1 million of them. And that's what I did every day. I just go place to place and say, this is the best firewall in the world. Let me show you how. So I had to become an expert in that firewall. I didn't know everything about everything that I could about that firewall so that I could tell people and explain to them why it was the best one they can have. So there's another good example of how security can be a job. And ultimately, maybe you just make YouTube videos. Maybe, that's the one. Ultimately, does it always come back to that? Well, it did for me. So let's go to the phones. 844 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Professor. How are you?
Hey, thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
Yeah, Professor, I just wanted to know your opinion about the main difference between PGP and perfect forward secrecy. I just have a lot of questions about it, and I just managed to read a lot, but can't get the answer about it.
So your question was specifically about PGP, and what was the other one?
Perfect forward secrecy.
Oh, PFS, perfect forward secrecy. So yeah, those are two very, very different things, two different types of technologies. Although the names sound very similar to each other, they are definitely very different in how they operate. PGP is an interesting technology. It's been around for a very long time. Phil Zimmermann was the one who originally created PGP, pretty good privacy, he called it. It was more than pretty good. It was really, really good privacy. So much good privacy. It was a method of asymmetric encryption and decryption, and one that was open sourced, that anyone in the world could have a way to encrypt a document, an email, a file, send that file to someone securely over the internet, and they could decrypt it on their side using this asymmetric encryption. And probably for the very first time, the government of any country or any third party would not be able to decrypt that information because the encryption was so strong. And so Phil Zimmermann had a number of legal issues when he introduced this software because of that, because it was such strong cryptography. The world had not seen it before, and it was the first popular open source and available asymmetric encryption and decryption mechanism that could be used by anybody, anywhere in the world to be able to have confidentiality. And ultimately, PGP has been bought and sold by different companies through the years. Network Associates, a company I worked for, bought PGP at one time. So I got to meet and talk with Phil Zimmermann when he was part of that organization. I think it's owned by Symantec these days. And it may have hopped on somewhere else. I haven't kept up with what PGP is doing. But there's an open source version of PGP, which is the GNU Privacy Guard, so GPG. So you may also see PGP and GPG mentioned in the same breath because they use the same types of algorithms and for the most part are interchangeable with each other. Someone can encrypt with PGP and decrypt with the GPG, for example. And if somebody wanted to send me a message encrypted with either one of those, I would see if I can read it and I will send that back. So if somebody wants to have practice over email with PGP or GPG, you're more than welcome to do that. And I think for the most part, PGP and GPG are integrated as email types of encryption using asymmetric algorithms. Now, we use asymmetric cryptography on our web servers too. So if you go to professormesser.com, you'll notice it's a secure website. Every page is HTTPS. So there are ways that people are able to proxy that information, especially I talked about working at a firewall company. We're able to proxy the SSL communication so that we can then decrypt it on our side using our own certificates. So some people will find that that's not a great thing. They would rather communicate securely to a site and not have a way that somebody can use an existing certificate to be able to decrypt that. And one way that you can avoid that is to connect to a website that uses PFS. That PFS functionality effectively is on the fly building a new set of keys, using it just for that session. And when that session's over, it throws the keys away. So that's one where it's almost always, whenever we talk about perfect forward secrecy, PFS, we're really talking about web server communication. It's usually referring to a session-based asymmetric communication, asymmetric setup. And once the keys are done, we throw the keys away and nobody's ever able to get into that data. There are ways to proxy PFS, but it's something that is not commonly done because of the overhead associated with it. But I've noticed a number of next generation firewalls are even starting to get into PFS proxying now as well. But it's one of those that does help with the with worrying about someone getting into your traffic later, because if it's not proxied, it's a temporary key that's being used and nobody can see any of your data after that. So hopefully that gives you an idea between those two technologies.
So perfect forward secrecy uses like Diffie-Hellman ephemeral, for what you say.
I'm sorry, it uses what?
It uses Diffie-Hellman ephemeral. Diffie-Hellman.
And the ephemeral part is really the important part of this. That's the part where once this particular key exchange is done and we have had this communication, throw the keys away. That's where the ephemeral part of that comes from. That's exactly the case. Build the keys on the fly, throw them away when you're done.
And PGP uses like a certificate of authority, something like that for the pair key.
Well, the difference with PGP, the most startling difference with PGP is you don't throw your keys away. Whenever you create a public-private key pair, that's your key pair forever, unless you want to change it out. And it's probably a good idea to change your keys out every few years. And obviously, if somebody was to gain access to your private key, you would throw that key away and create another key pair. But it's not ephemeral. It's something that you're always going to have. I think I probably am due to change out my PGP keys, but those are the ones I'm using right now. And I'm not going to throw those away. When I send you an email, I'm still going to keep my private key. I don't throw those away when the session is done.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor, for the help.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
There's another question in the chat room about 401 and 501. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the 786 area code's been holding an awful long time. Thanks for holding. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, thank you so much, Professor. My name's Q, and I'm calling from Los Angeles.
Welcome.
I had a couple of questions. Thank you. So I was rejected at a junior security analyst position here in LA, and the reason that was given was that I don't really have any application knowledge. I don't have experience, in other words.
Okay.
Which I don't. And I'm currently starting WGU in August, and I did pass my Security Plus. What do I do in order to gain more experience? Because it's a little hard finding internships over here in the LA area. So, I mean, in terms of, I'm starting school, what do I need to do?
Well, you mentioned the job title was a security analyst, but what type of position was it really? And I mention this because security is a very broad, just saying security has so many different things it could be. There's obviously a huge divide or huge difference between somebody doing computer science and somebody who's doing security in the IT areas. Those are two very different worlds. What specific world were you focusing on, or what specific world was this job in?
So they were primarily going to put me on a position where I was going to work on intrusion IDS and IPS.
Okay. So it's definitely the IT side of things, because programmers don't get into the IPS, IDS type of things unless you're building your own, which people don't generally do either. So you mentioned that they wanted to see that you had more experience with certain applications. Did they mention which applications they were interested in?
they did not mention that, but when they were hiring me, they said that they would train me and stuff, and I just assumed that Security Plus would be enough, but I guess it wasn't. So I just need some, yeah.
Well, the type of job you're mentioning, and these are the people that I would talk to and spend time with in my last role as a systems engineer. And I mentioned this earlier, is that all of those people that I would go in and talk to all had a very strong networking foundation. And I mean a super strong networking foundation. And I mentioned that people often don't think about this on the security side. They think security is all the things that we see with Security Plus. But on networking, especially when you look at, let's just look at an enterprise firewall, that for most organizations, their enterprise firewall is probably one of the core pieces of their security infrastructure. That enterprise firewall has to integrate into their network in some way. Are you integrating that firewall on a layer 3 mode where it's routing? Are you integrating it maybe in a layer 1 physical mode where you're simply a bump in the wire and you're passing through data from one side to the other? How do you implement that firewall into a routed environment and provide, most people are going to have 2 firewalls for redundancy. How do you implement those to have them perform either in an active configuration where both firewalls are active at the same time, or how do you implement those in an active-passive? And if you implement them as active-passive and the first firewall fails, how does the rest of the infrastructure know that you failed over to the backup firewall? Now, maybe you're not plugging in a layer 3, maybe you're in a layer 1, which means if you lose one firewall, how do you now pass that through or pass it over to the other firewall? That's a completely different methodology. Now, that's just putting it into the network. And of course, you got to deal with IP addressing, subnetting. You got to deal with, in many cases, dynamic routing and how that integrates. And it might be BGP on one side of the firewall and OSPF on the other. And then how do you handle the translation of those routing protocols from one side to the other? Now, everything we just talked about was simply how do you get the firewall onto the network? There's not even, I didn't even mention security yet. And yet we've just gone through, I've sat in meetings for a day where we talked about what I just said. So that is a massive networking engineering discussion. And there's a lot of questions that I have asked about people. How do you plan on putting this in? Here are the advantages and disadvantages. What type of networking do you have? What type of systems do you have? How do you want to implement this? There's all of these things that happen. And some organizations are stronger on the networking side. They know exactly how they want to do it. And I need to make my product do that. Or they have no idea what they're doing and they're relying on me to put it in the best possible way, which is scary that I'm the one designing their network. And but it seems that many times, more times than not, that seems to be how it's going to go. So whenever you sit for somebody and they say, we need a good security person, they're probably going to ask you a lot of networking questions. One of the questions we would ask, as a matter of fact, I've mentioned this in other study groups. I had an SE manager at Palo Alto Networks who said, the first thing I ask people is, tell me everything you know about ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol, ARP. Tell me everything you know. And so now that you tell me about ARP, tell me about proxy ARP. Tell me about and all the things associated with that. When would you use it? How is that used? Tell me about reverse ARP. How was that used? When would you ever use that? And so there were all of these questions just about this one protocol. So the bulk of the first part of the conversation was just all about ARP. Now, not everybody has a conversation like that when they sit down for a security role, but it speaks to how important the networking part of this is to getting the rest of the Security Plus going. And if you're integrating, let's just look at IPS type functionality and intrusion prevention system, all of those same questions I just had about implementing an enterprise firewall are almost identical when you're implementing an IPS. And of course, you've got other questions as well, because maybe the IPS will not sit in line. And if it doesn't sit in line, how do you plan on blocking traffic? Is there certain traffic you would not be able to block? What type of traffic would that be? So these are the things that an employer is going to ask of you, a potential employer is going to ask in the interview. And if you're familiar with IPSs and you're familiar with how those go into the network, you'll have an answer for those. But if you've never stuck an IPS in a network before, there's just no way you're going to know. You're going to have to do it at some point to be able to make that happen. And maybe that's the point where now you set up your own lab. And you can tell them, well, I haven't had a job where I've done this in an enterprise network, but let me tell you how I did it in my lab. And I set up Snort, and I set it up in line, and here's how we configured it. And I set up these particular rules, and we did it this particular way. And I can show you online. I got it online right now. Let me bring up a browser. Here's what's running at my home right now. Those are the types of things I think employers are looking for, is some type of, what did you use this certification to do? Now that you have your Security Plus, have you done anything with it? And it doesn't have to be at an employer. You can do things with it at your home in a lab. And I think those things would be extremely valuable if you're able to present those to somebody where you've got at least some knowledge that you were able to use based on this certification you have. The other thing I'd mention, especially because in your geographical area, there's just a huge wealth of advantages for getting involved with a user group. And I've mentioned this on other study groups as well, is that you need to do people networking. There are plenty of Microsoft user groups, VMware user groups. You're in LA, so there's Checkpoint user groups, Palo Alto Network user groups. There are user groups that are just security. The ISSA is a good example, where it's just security, very broad security scope. Get to know the people in those user groups. Go for the knowledge, but also go to meet people. Oh, where do you work? What do you do there? I've seen that company before. I'm in the process of trying to get a job in security. If you were me, what would you recommend I do to have the best chance at getting a job in your company? That's some valuable intel right there. Even if you're not going to get a job with that company, even if you weren't even planning to interview with that company, having that company tell you, here's the type of people we're looking for and what they know becomes valuable. Also, if you do happen to interview ultimately with that company, you may not even be interviewing the person at the user group, but you can say you know them. Oh, yes, I met him at the user group. I see him there all the time. We talk about blah, blah, blah. We're LinkedIn. Yep, I know all about that piece of your network, because employers want to hire people they know. Perhaps even more than hiring people that may be even qualified for the position. So doing that people networking goes an enormously long way to locking in and having an advantage over anyone else who may be interviewing for that same position.
I guess I got overwhelmed when I was at the interview, because it was my first job interview in the security field, and I just got the shakes and I couldn't answer the questions. But setting up a lab, yes, that's definitely something that's been on my mind, and I want to do it. Are there any videos available that help setting up a lab that you have online, or that you would suggest?
Nothing that I have that I've made, but there are plenty on YouTube that go through some of these details, and I can point you in directions. For example, go set up Snort. You mentioned IPS. That's a great place to start, because it's not as involved in setting up an enterprise firewall or a firewall in general. But having Snort there has many of the same characteristics. There's rules. You have to configure the Linux side of things. There's interfaces and multiple ins and outs that you have to deal with, and things you have to look for in the traffic that's going by. That's a good place to start. And there's tons of available videos and content about setting up Snort. I think that's a great place to start. From there, you can even move up. If you really did want to set up a firewall, and there are a number of firewalls that integrate Snort in them, pfSense is a good example of one. Try integrating pfSense with Snort running on it. Now you can build on that. And if somebody says, what have you done with firewalls? What have you done with IPS? Trust me, you spend a day working with Snort, you're going to have tons of stories to explain about how difficult this was to set up, what you managed to do with it, and what you have running through it today. Same thing with pfSense, same thing with creating reports from pfSense and Snort, and being able to access those from a browser at any time wherever you happen to be can also be valuable as well. So those will get you going. Once you have those two things running, the people that you're interviewing can say, all right, firewalls, then we can move you into Checkpoint, we can move you into Palo Alto, Snort, so we can run the IPS stuff that's running on those firewalls as well. And you've got the concepts, and you've been doing that and finding those things. And when you set up Snort on your network, you will be always surprised at what you find. And this is something that goes back to even my days as a systems engineer. I love doing evaluations. I love plugging in a next generation firewall in someone's network and passing traffic through it, because we always saw something we had never seen before. There was always a story. And whenever you go into an interview, you talked about there's a lot of anxiety when you go in these interviews. But if you have some stories, when you plug this in, let me tell you what we found, and then you tell the story of what you found, that could be a very, very valuable tool that you can pull out of your pocket right in the middle of an interview to really get someone to understand what you've been doing with these technologies.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's something that I'm gonna definitely work on. Last question. I mentioned that I'm starting WGU, the cybersecurity and the information assurance degree. I don't know if you've done any research on the college. How would you recommend this going forward?
It is. There are many and varied opinions about Western Governors University. This is a consortium of state universities. So this is not a third-party for-profit type thing that you may have seen somewhere else, but their focus is on having you learn the things you need to know at a practical level. So it's very, very focused on learning things that will get you to a point where you can take a certification and pass that certification. So they have a Security Plus class that will take you through learning all the things you know for Security Plus, and then taking that at the end of it. Now you Security Plus certified. They've got it for Microsoft certifications and Cisco certifications, and they'll take you down that road. A lot of people feel that at the end of it, what you have is a group of certifications, but you don't have any practical experience. But that's another straw man, in my opinion, because you can go through a 4-year degree at a university and you have exactly zero practical experience at the end of that as well. The problem with most 4-year universities is that you also have zero practical knowledge in IT as well. I came out of, I got a business degree, and my business degree, I took classes on calculus. Why was I taking calculus for a business degree? Well, because they made you take it to earn your business degree. Nobody uses calculus in business. What are you talking? But certainly nobody uses that in IT. Why did I go through an accounting class? Why did I go through all of these classes? Now, some of the classes I took were great, and they do apply to some of the things I do today, but they were all over the place. IT is a different animal. Information technology, in many ways, is much more focused on what you know rather than a broad scope of knowledge that you would gain somewhere else. I mean, it's great that I took an art class and I understood art through the ages, but it did nothing to help me implement high availability on dual firewalls connected to a BGP connection. So that's where you run into problems, is how do you take your art class and turn it into something practical in IT? You can't.
Right.
So WGU has kind of flipped the script on everyone and said, guess what? Employers want people who are knowledgeable, who at least have a foundational knowledge of these things. Maybe you don't have a formal experience yet, but that's not the point of getting this type of degree. You need to get some type of hands-on so that when you get out of this degree, you can jump into these meetings that you're going to have. And when somebody tells you, we need to create a trust, we bought a company and they have their own Active Directory, and we need to create a trust between these Active Directory for us. And I know what you're talking about. I may not know how to click and do exactly what you're saying, but I'm well down the road of knowing exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Figuring out how to do it's the easy part after that. So that's why I think there is value to what places like WGU are doing when they are applied and implemented in a way that makes sense for what you're trying to do.
So you would recommend, because they do incorporate, their curriculum has, when I spoke to the counselor, she also said that we have all these certifications incorporated to our curriculum, which is, I think, a good thing. So coming from you, I take that you would recommend that.
I'm a lurker on the WGU Slack. They have a Slack that is public. It's not a WGU sponsored Slack. Slack is sort of, for those listening, it's sort of like Discord. It's a competitor of Discord, but they've got tons of of different channels on their Slack, and I sort of sit in the CompTIA one and just watch what goes on. I'm not a huge participant because a lot of what they're doing is either dealing with certifications that I don't deal with, like Project Plus or some of the others. And most of the time, they're pretty self-sufficient. They don't need me getting in there and figuring it out. But if they have questions from time to time, I go in there. So I at least have some idea of the ebb and flow. And I get what they're trying to do. And I like their style. I think getting that type of knowledge for someone going into IT is probably going to be more practical than somebody learning about art through the ages.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate the call.
Hopefully, yeah, thank you so much.
Best of luck. That's great, though. You know, you've got options. I have a 4-year degree from Florida State University. I did like my Art Through the Ages class that I took. It was interesting. I did get a lot out of my personnel management. I didn't get a lot out of my cost accounting, although now I know why I'm paying an accountant so much, because I don't get it. So you do run into that. There is some value there. So not all the classes. The ones that really were stupid to me were calculus. Why did I take calculus? And today, even today, this many, many years later, to get an IT, or really what they called it MIS, but an IT specialization or a business management degree today still requires you get calculus. What are you guys thinking? Really? Why do you think that's important? Is it important because it's hard? And you can say, well, it was hard, so this particular 4-year degree must be valuable. No, that's not how it works. That's not even close to how it works. Go to 937 area codes, talk to this guy, see what's going on, or gal, and see what's going on. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from? Caller, 937. Are you muted? Am I muted? Nope, I'm not muted. I'm there. You're potted up. The potentiometer is potted up. The channel is open. I'm there. There you go. I hear something. I hear me. Are you there, caller? Listen to the stream. I'm not listening to the phone. Are you there? See? I sound great, by the way. For those of you wondering, we're gonna try that again. It was a nice try, though. We gave it a shot. You'll notice there's a delay. This is not a intentional delay, but I send a video stream with audio to YouTube. YouTube packages it up and sends it out to you in a separate form. So they re-render everything I send to them. So you're not seeing this live. It takes time to do that, to re-render it and then send it back out. So the type of stream I'm using is probably about a 10 to 15 second delay. So if you call in and you're listening to the stream, I picked up 10 to 15 seconds ago. So that's what's going on with that. Let's pop over to 559. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from? Is it the same caller? It's a different area code, though. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from? I think I hear something, but it's not very loud. If you are calling from Skype, by the way, I think you may have figured it out there. Just at the end, as I hung up the phone, you're welcome to call back to 855-785-7545. And on Skype, it's a +1 855-785-RJ45 to call in. Let's try the 937 again. Are you there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Lee.
It's Lee.
Dayton,
Hello,
Ohio.
Lee. How are you, sir? What can we do for you?
Oh, finally, I'm able to speak to the great.
Well, the great one's not here, but I'll do the best I can. What can we do for you?
For testing purposes, Professor Messer, I'm curious, how important is it for us to be able to differentiate, because I think they're synonymous, between fault tolerance and redundancy? Yeah, it's important to know the difference, or at least the nuances between them. And this is something you will absolutely run into in the security world. You run into it everywhere in IT, but perhaps even more so in the security world, because a lot of the devices that we are using to watch our networks, to watch the traffic go through, to control traffic flows, are at critical points on the network. And if those devices fail, we don't want the network to go down. That's the biggest problem I think that some security people have, is they are seen as a problem. They're the people creating problems and not allowing traffic to flow, which is kind of a bad way to look at it. So redundancy and fault tolerance are tied together pretty closely. They're kind of an overlap. If we had to do a Venn diagram of these, you would have an overlap of what's there. Redundancy means there's a backup. So in redundancy, we've got a way that if we have a failure, we got a plan B. So take an example, if we have a redundant firewall, since I did firewalls, that's a good one I go with. We take a firewall, we plug it into our internet connection. Everybody communicates to the internet through our firewall. If that firewall fails, the internet connection goes down. But that's okay because I have a redundant firewall. I can now go into the closet where I bought an extra one. I can pull it out of its box, turn it on, update its firmware. Maybe I've got a backup of the configuration, hopefully, or I have to rebuild the configuration on that firewall. I can put it onto the network, and then only 4 hours later, we're back up and running. So my redundancy didn't provide me with, and trust me, nobody during that 4-hour period was very tolerant of me at all. People are very angry with me during that 4-hour period because nothing was working. But I was redundant. I had a box, and we're back up and running. Fault tolerance tends to be one where when there's a fault, we can immediately address the fault. In most cases, if it's done properly without anybody ever knowing there was a problem. This is commonly, when we go through the ranks, referred to with RAID, where we have fault tolerance built with RAID, that if we lose a hard drive, there's another drive there or process with having some type of parity so that the system continues to operate. We don't lose any data. And in some cases, most cases, nobody even knows we lost a drive. We get a text message. The text message tells us a drive failed. We pull it out. We replace it. The system automatically rebuilds itself, and nobody ever knew that a problem happened. That is some fault tolerance right there, where it's able to do that so quickly that nobody even knew. Same thing with firewalls, and I mentioned this in a call earlier. With firewalls, we usually implement them in pairs. Some people call this the Noah's Ark of networking. We have 2 firewalls with 2 routers and then 2 switches behind it. So our firewalls are set up, and usually they're set up in an active-passive configuration because that's the easiest one to engineer. And so this firewall is working, and then let's say the power supply goes out on the firewall. Poof. It only had one power supply. So from a power supply perspective, that firewall was not very fault tolerant. Poof, the power supply went out. But because we have another firewall sitting right there that's connected, that's designed to be a backup, the second firewall realizes, wow, the first firewall is not talking to me anymore. I'm taking over, everybody. And a half a second later, all of our traffic is now flowing through the secondary firewall, and nobody knows that anything happened. That's fault tolerance.
That's the beauty of the fault tolerance.
It is. That's why everybody would like to be redundant, but they really want to be fault tolerant.
Got you. Wow, you really clarified that for me.
As someone who has had to sit through firewall outages and configuring so much high availability with my fault tolerance, that does come in to be a pretty important component of security.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Messer. I really appreciate your time and great assistance.
Thanks for calling, Lee.
That's whenever I look at this, whenever you're plugging in the fault tolerant configuration, the high availability is the one that really provides the best turnaround time for all of those. Boy, that comes in handy. There's so many times I've configured high availability in a fault tolerant configuration just for that scenario to happen. And when it's engineered properly, it is seamless. It works so well. Back to 559, who I think I hung up on earlier. Are there, caller? What's your name? Where are you calling from? See, I'm waiting this time. I'm waiting for you, caller. You've been holding, and you're there. Hello, hi. Thanks for calling. What's your name? Where are you calling from? So,
my name is Fernando.
Oh, it's so close. I am almost able to make out what you're saying.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Do you have a question?
First of all, thank you for all your job. It's a very good job to help people get the certification.
Thank you so much.
I'm from Brazil. I'm talking from São Paulo.
Welcome. What question do you have for us today?
I would like you to talk a little bit about ephemeral keys.
Sure. Is there a particular implementation of ephemeral keys that you're interested in, or we talked earlier about perfect forward secrecy, but is there a different implementation you're interested in?
To tell you the truth, I had a little difficulty to understand the meaning or the way it works.
Sure. And let's kind of step through why you would ever have what ephemeral keys are and why you would ever use them. And that's something that you do run into also outside of PFS as well. And let's mention a good example of these. We'll go through a couple of ones that are very common. So an ephemeral key is one, as the name implies, that it's temporary. Ephemeral means temporary. So if we're going to implement or use an ephemeral key, it's one that we are creating for a particular use. And when that use is over, and it's usually short-lived, this is not something that sticks around for a day, sometimes not even an hour, we're done with the key, we throw it out. Why would you ever do that, you might ask? And a good example is that's when we spoke earlier about PFS, perfect forward secrecy, where normally on a web server, a private key and public key is configured on a web server. And whenever a device needs to communicate securely to that web server, the web server sends over its public key, and the user can encrypt and send back information that can then be used to transfer a symmetric key so that the two devices can communicate securely. Well, if you know the public key and you're able to capture the traffic, then you then are able to decrypt that data after the fact. So this obviously is not something in a very secure environment that you would ever want to do. You never want to have it so that somebody can capture your traffic and later on decrypt everything that you've sent back and forth. All they'd have to do is get a hold of the private key on that server. So what if your web server, whenever you first communicated to it, built its own brand new key pair? So it didn't have a key that was always on the server. It built a brand new one, sent that one over to the client, sent the public key to the client. It communicated, created a symmetric key, and we communicated back and forth. And when we stopped talking to each other, we threw the keys away. And then the next person that showed up, we'd create a whole new set of keys. So everybody gets a completely different public-private key pair that if you captured the traffic, there would be no way to decrypt it because you wouldn't have an access to the original private key that was used for that conversation. Generally, it's only stored in memory and then it's thrown out once the session is over. It could be said that the symmetric key that is used in this web communication is also ephemeral because the symmetric key is used for a certain amount of time and then it's thrown out, and that's done for everybody connecting as well. So those are some very common examples of how ephemeral keys are used, either during the key exchange process with PFS, or even if it's non-PFS, the symmetric key that's used to encrypt these web sessions. Does that help give some insight into ephemeral keys?
Yes. So ephemeral keys, it's good to use only once. Is that?
And not only is it good, and probably in many cases advantageous, it's probably a good idea in most cases to use ephemeral keys because they're more secure. The problem you have is that if you have a website that has a lot of traffic going to it, the building of a public-private key pair, the creation of those public-private keys is a non-trivial matter. It uses a good bit of CPU and memory just to create a key pair. It takes some time as well. We're not talking about minutes of time. It takes seconds of time or faster, depending on how big that key is going to be, to create that key pair. So if you have 2 or 3 people hitting your website at a time,
That's no big deal. Your web server makes the PFS ephemeral key, and now you can keep things moving. What if 1,000 people are hitting your website at one time? What if 10,000 people are hitting your website at one time? There's a good bit of cryptography that has to take place, a good bit of CPU cycles that has to take place. So there's overhead associated with this. If there wasn't overhead, everybody would be doing it this way. But because of the overhead, it doesn't apply to everybody who may be doing this. And in the case of maybe my server, maybe I don't have anything that's so important that remains secure that I have to worry about an ephemeral key, and I don't want to take on that additional overhead. I'll just use a non-ephemeral key to make that happen. So you've got some options there. It just depends on what the implementation is, how much overhead you can expect, and what your web server can handle.
Okay, thank you very much for your explanation.
I appreciate your calling. All the way from Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's another place I haven't gone yet. We got to make that happen. We got to get there for those types of things. We've got, I think I got another call that's come through. I was about to finish things up when somebody snuck in there. So let's figure out who's on the call and where they're calling from. Are you there, caller?
Hello?
Hi, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hi. Cody.
Hi, Cody.
And,
I know I picked you up quick there.
Las
What can we do
Vegas.
for you?
No, I just have a question. I was wondering, I took the ICD1, the CSINT test.
Yes.
And I passed it.
Nice.
And then I took the Network Plus test and didn't pass it.
Whoa.
But, and I was wondering, is it like, what's the comparison for ICD&2 if I just didn't ever do Network Plus? Like, how does that work out?
Right. This is, and people kind of mistake sometimes, and I see this mistake all the time because I monitor Cisco related message groups. I monitor Network Plus related message groups. I obviously have course notes for the ICND1, which if you pass that, you earn the CCENT as you did. And people sometimes blend together the Network Plus and the ICND1 as if they are similar exams. And in the past, they would not have necessarily been wrong. They were very similar in the past, in fact. But these days, I mean, over the last 5 years or so, these have been very different exams. In fact, there's a number of topics on the Network Plus that are not covered on the ICND1 at all. Port numbers is a good example, and it's one of many. Another good example is IPsec, not done on the ICND1 at all, but obviously significant on the Network Plus. So you can't study for the ICND1 and, well, as you've seen, and take the Network Plus and think that there's going to be a one-to-one relationship there, because there really isn't. But you mentioned the ICND2, because if you pass that, you will effectively have earned your CCNA routing and switching certification, which is a very well looked upon certification, because the Cisco exams, and here's the big difference between these two, is the Cisco exams really go into the details. And I mean into the details. You're at the command line, you're setting up the routing, you're setting up the static routing, you're configuring the switch parameters, you're building trunks. It is the things you would normally do as a switch and router administrator, and you're into the middle of it. You really do understand the nuances of 802.1q trunking when you take the ICND1. You don't really get into the nuances of 802.1q and Network Plus. You don't get into the nuances of anything in Network Plus. Network Plus is more of a broad brush across all of these technologies so that you understand what 802.1q does. Functionally, you know how it operates. You functionally understand what IPsec is doing, but you aren't implementing it in any practical way in the Network Plus exam. And that's the two biggest differences when you start looking at these. I think to your question, which is, should you just take the ICND2 and get the routing and switching and go with it? I think from an employer's perspective, I think once they see that you have a CCNA routing and switching, they aren't probably as much concerned about the Network Plus, because in their mind, you've already got a certification that they would put as a higher priority or a more difficult certification to earn. Even though they're not interchangeable,
they are still, the Cisco exams are very difficult. And so getting through all of those speaks well to your knowledge or practical knowledge of these networking technologies. Even if you didn't learn every port number that you ever need to know with networking, you've already got a practical knowledge you've been able to prove by passing and earning the CCNA routing and switching certification. I think if I were you in your shoes, I would probably not be going back to finish my Network Plus if I knew I was going to complete my ICND2.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I was just wondering. I'm like, well, because not passing the Network Plus kind of like threw me for a loop because it was a way different test than the CCENT test.
Way different.
I don't know. Maybe it's more the practical application. The command line stuff. Once you actually start doing it gives you easier practice. Whereas Network Plus, it seems like it's more just memorize this, memorize that, and then put the topics together and come up with something.
I think you're right. And I think it's a different approach. It's a different perspective. And Cisco wants you to be able to type in those commands, and they want you to recover a switch if you don't have the password anymore. That just doesn't come up in the Network Plus. It's a completely different approach. And employers, I think, understand and recognize that the CCNA routing and switching has that practical aspect to it. And I think that's attractive to many employers.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then, so Security Plus and like A Plus would still be good to get though too, right?
Well, they of course have different approaches. Those have a completely different perspective as well. Security Plus certainly builds on the networking knowledge that you're getting with both a Network Plus or a CCNA routing and switching. A Plus has its own perspective. A Plus is really considered to be your entry level into IT. And if you're someone who's going to be going into switch administration, network administration, router administration, and then ultimately into security, you probably wouldn't necessarily need the knowledge that A Plus provides. But if you're somebody who's going to be starting at a help desk and eventually getting into networking, the A Plus might be a good option.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Cody. You've got some options. You got things that you can at least work through, have a perspective of, figure out what makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish, because there's no one answer. Everybody has a different goal. They're trying to get a different kind of position. So people want to know, what should I do first? What should I do second? And what should I do third? Please fill in the blanks. I can't answer that question. I don't know what your goals are. We can talk about that. And we can figure out, what are you working towards? What would you like to do? What type of technologies interest you the most? And then we can put together a plan. If I were you, here's what I would look at doing. But there's also other things that are in the mix that we don't know. What are employers in your geographical area looking for? Sometimes you can discern that information by going to job posting sites and starting to do more research in your area, because it's very geographical. What they need in the Northeast United States is very different than what they need in the Central Southwest. There's differences all there that you have to figure out. And there's also that X factor of knowing the people. I mentioned earlier, going to the study groups, these user groups in your area. So if you go to an ISSA user group and you meet all of these people in security, and you find out they have a junior security role that's opening, and you already know them and they understand your background, and you come in and you talk to them and you have a good interview, they already know who you are. So there's things you can do on that side that really do help you get the job, even though you may have exactly the same background and exactly the same knowledge as someone else. You know someone there. Don't discount that. There was, I've mentioned this earlier, I think in my entire career, I've had about 12 to 15 jobs. I really need to count this out. My very first job out of college was working for a computer company in South Miami. And it was a real grunt job. I just load up my computer, my car with printer cables and hard drives that I was installing in the morning, and I would drive around to different places and install those. And then at the end of the day, I'd show up and say, okay, here's all the stuff I did. So that was a job where I didn't know anybody. And I don't know why they hired me, but they did. And I didn't know anybody there. But by going to all of these places, I started to meet people in the area. And every job that I've ever gotten after that point, I knew somebody at that company where I was going. Sometimes that person was not the hiring manager, but they worked in technology. And I could say, oh, I know this person. I've known them a long time. I met them doing this job I'm doing now. And here's what we're doing. Here's the projects we've worked on. That's a very valuable thing to say. Don't discount that. That has helped me all the way through my career, is knowing somebody where I was looking for a job. So literally every other job after that, the 12 jobs I got after that first one, I knew someone who worked there. Except this job, I didn't know anybody who worked here. I need to fix that and get that one going. That's one where so it's a good investment in your time. If you're trying to figure out, I'm tired at the end of the day, I've had a long day at work, I don't want to go out on a Wednesday night and sit for an hour and hear somebody talk about what's happening with firewall technology. But first, you're going to learn something. There's actually really interesting people talking at these things, but meeting those people is the valuable part. You can't put a price on it. It's an incredibly important investment in your future. And you should absolutely consider the value in doing that. And of course, it's always nice to meet people in your area. You know, even if you don't get a job with them, if you have questions about, hey, we're putting in this new firewall, you know, I think these people at this company have that firewall too. Let me call them. Let me send them a note and see if they can tell me more about that. Those are excellent things to also have available, where you can see what other people's experiences are with these technologies you're putting in. Well, that brings us to the end of another hour of Q&A. Thanks for joining us on our first hour of Q&A. Thanks for being here in the after show. Thanks for your questions in the chat room, your questions on the call-in lines. We really couldn't do it without you. We've made it through another month of this. Don't forget, next week is July 4th. So we aren't having a live stream next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that, we'll continue with our A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus for the month of July. I hope everyone has a fantastic and safe 4th of July holiday if you're here in the United States. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Security Plus study group. Thanks, everyone.